Chapter 40-37. Seeing the sword of burial of heaven fall from the sky, Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with a hint of panic, and he subconsciously wanted to pick it up. However, Dao Xingyun revealed a smug sneer. He immediately waved the silver dragon divine spear to block Ji Tianxing and took the opportunity to counterattack. Left with no other choice, Ji Tianxing was forced to defend himself and retreat step by step as he fled into the distance. Naturally, he couldn't pick up the sword of burial of heaven that had fallen from the sky. One of his swords had been shot down, and he had lost a suitable weapon. His battle prowess had naturally decreased. Dao Xingyun became more and more confident. He saw the dawn of defeating Ji Tianxing and he increased the pace of his attacks. Thus, Ji Tianxing could only increase his speed and escape, and he was exhausted from defending against Dao Xingyun's fierce attacks. Even the 400-plus foreign race god kings became spirited when they saw this scene. They were full of confidence as they increased the speed of their pursuit. As for the sword of burial of heaven that had fallen from the sky and disappeared into thin air, no one paid any attention to it. Perhaps, there were a few foreign race god kings who thought of picking up that divine sword and taking it for themselves. However, they didn't dare to leave the group and pick up the sword of burial of heaven in front of everyone. They could only suppress their greed and chase after Ji Tianxing with the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. No one knew that the sword of burial of heaven that had disappeared into thin air was hiding in an alternate space and observing for a moment. It only appeared again after the group of god kings flew 100,000 miles away. It secretly followed behind the group of god kings, looking for an opportunity to attack. Of course, everyone was immersed in the joy and anticipation of pursuing the enemy while they were victorious. No one cared that the group of god kings was being left further and further behind, and that they were gradually losing touch with Dao Xingyun. As a matter of fact, even the group of over 400 foreign god kings grew longer and longer before they knew it. It couldn't be helped. The strength of these god kings was different and their flying speed was also different. Some were more severely injured, some were less injured, and some weren't that injured. This also affected their flying speed. About 15 minutes later, the Divine King's army stretched to about 50,000 miles, and was divided into 5 groups. At the same time, they were left behind by Dao Xingyun by more than 200,000 miles. They could no longer see the figures of Ji Tianxing and Dao Xingyun. They could only see the sky in front of them constantly shattering and dazzling divine light shining. At this moment something unexpected happened. At the very back of the group of god kings, a streak of white light suddenly flashed through the originally shattered and empty sky. It was the sword of burial of heaven. It had sped up and caught up to the god king's team. Swish, swish. As the white light flickered, the world in the sword opened. Figures flew out and appeared in the sky. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu, Lon Liang. One after another, god king experts appeared, brimming with energy and killing intent. Ji Tianxing wasn't present. This battle was led by the sword of burial of heaven. It was the first to charge into the god king's team, causing a bloody scene. Following that, Ji Ku wielded the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda in his left hand and brandished his divine spear in his right hand. He unleashed his nirvana flames and killed many foreign god kings. Yun Yao, Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu and company followed closely behind. They unleashed their most powerful attacks, dealing fatal blows to the foreign god kings. Apart from killing enemies, the sword of burial of heaven was also responsible for supporting everyone. As for Ji Ku, apart from killing enemies, he also used his intrinsic divine artifact, the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda, to save everyone at critical moments. As the strongest person in the group, Bai Feng also unleashed her heavenly phoenix shadow. She transformed into a white heavenly phoenix that blotted out the sky and released the most violent divine flames. Since it was a surprise attack, everyone didn't hold back. They unleashed all their potential and strength. Their goal was to kill as many foreign race god kings as possible in the shortest amount of time. Swish, 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 bam, 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 bam. The dozens of foreign god kings at the back of the group were the weakest mid-level god kings to begin with. Furthermore, they were all severely injured. They weren't on guard at all. Suddenly, an expert attacked from the back of the group. As a result, by the time they recovered from their shock, it was already too late for them to dodge. Following an earth-shattering explosion, waves of blood gushed out from the group of foreign god kings. Destructive divine light shockwaves burst forth. Saber lights and sword shadows flashed and 5-colored flames soared. In just one exchange, more than 20 foreign god kings were blasted into pieces. Broken limbs and blood rained down. After 2 breaths, the foreign god kings regained their senses. They shouted and roared angrily as they launched a counterattack. However, Yun Yao, Jiku and company's momentum had already been built. They charged forward with unstoppable momentum. With the Sword of Burial of Heaven as the vanguard, they formed a sharp blade and ruthlessly stabbed into the foreign god kings, tearing them apart. Bam, 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 boom, boom. Loud noises rose and fell one after another, lingering in the ears. The foreign god kings' screams didn't stop either. As the waves of blood surged, many foreign god kings were smashed into pieces and turned into ashes. The outcome was already decided. After 100 breaths, this ferocious attack came to an end. 47 foreign god kings who were severely injured and weaker were all killed by the group. Not a single one survived. At this moment, the group of god kings 20,000 miles ahead had already realized that the situation behind them was not good. When they saw a group of god kings appear out of thin air behind them and kill more than 40 of their comrades like they were chopping vegetables, they were also shocked. However, after they calmed down and observed carefully, they realized that Yun Yao, Jiku and company's cultivation realms were not high. Other than Bai Feng, who was a high-level god king, the rest were mid-level and low-level god kings. Such weak cultivation realms dispelled their worries and made them feel much more relaxed. As for the fact that more than 40 of their comrades were killed, they didn't think that Yun Yao and company were that powerful. It was just that their comrades were severely injured and were caught off guard when they were ambushed. Very soon, this group of god kings turned around and charged towards Yun Yao and company. There were a total of more than 100 foreign god kings. They were filled with excitement and joy as they charged over with murderous intent. Although they were about to fight a huge battle, they weren't flustered at all. In fact, they were very happy and excited. They were actually grateful for the appearance of Yun Yao, Jiku and company. After all, they finally had something to do. They didn't have to participate in the battle between Dao Xingyun and Ji Tianxing. They just had to surround and kill a dozen or so weak god kings. It was simply too easy. Both sides had yet to fight, but many of the foreign god kings were already planning not to use too much strength later. They had to take it easy. This was to prevent them from killing Yun Yao and company in 3 to 5 moves. They wouldn't be able to stall for time and would have to surround and attack Ji Tianxing. Many of the foreign god kings had this thought. They had a tacit understanding. However, Yun Yao, Jiku and company reacted very quickly. Seeing nearly 100 foreign god kings charging over, Jiku made a prompt decision to activate the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and put everyone into the distorted spacetime. Then she brought the pagoda into the sword world. The Burial of Heaven's sword that was ready to attack disappeared with a flash of light. It had hidden itself again. Chapter 4038. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was not a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. However, it was more than enough to deal with those middle-level and upper-level foreign race godly kings. Most importantly, it was even more special than supreme-grade divine artifacts. That was because it had a complete sword soul and had its own consciousness. It used the divine sword's power to hide in an alternate dimension, completely isolating the hundreds of foreign race godly kings from probing. This move was very beautiful, instantly causing those godly kings to miss their target. Ah! Damn it! Where did they go? They were still here just now. Why did they all disappear with a flash of light? Where did they hide? Why can't I detect them with my divine consciousness? Everyone, be careful of traps. Don't panic. Search carefully. The foreign race godly kings who were still excited and fighting bravely immediately quieted down. Everyone stood in the sky and looked around in confusion, searching for something in all directions. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had already passed through the alternate dimension and left this place. It flew 50,000 miles at an extremely fast speed and caught up with another group of foreign race godly kings. This group had more than 70 people and they were basically middle-level godly kings. Moreover, their injuries were relatively light. Although these godly kings were definitely more difficult to deal with. However, this group was focused on traveling and did not notice the abnormality behind them. They also did not know that more than 40 of their comrades had been killed. In other words, these godly kings were not on guard at all. Swish. When no one was paying attention, the Sword of Burial of Heaven escaped from the alternate dimension and appeared on the right side of the group. With a flash of white light, the world within the sword opened. Jiku appeared high in the sky with the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda. The Sword of Burial of Heaven exploded with the fastest speed and the sharpest sword energy as it charged into the group of godly kings. Jiku also opened the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda and released Yunyao, Chao Qingyu and the others. Everyone used the same trick and used their trump cards to attack the foreign race godly kings in front of them. Bam, 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 boom, boom. The scene from before played out once again. Saber lights and sword shadows covered the shattered sky. Dazzling multicolored divine flames and glazed flames poured down like a flood. The shattered sky was instantly filled with dazzling divine light. Following a series of loud noises, destructive shockwaves spread out in all directions. As soon as the two sides clashed, 2 alien god kings were insta-killed by the Burial of Heaven. Soon after, even more foreign race god kings were killed by Feng Yunyao and the others. The group's sneak attack was indeed effective. Many foreign race god kings came back to their senses and immediately began to counterattack. The curtains of a great battle of daggers clashing against each other thus began. The Heaven Burial sword continued to charge forward. It was like a black streak of death as it shot through the battlefield, killing foreign god kings one after another. Every single god king that was struck by the black sword light had their heads smashed and their godheads destroyed. However, no matter how domineering and sharp it was, there would be a time when its power would weaken. After charging forward more than 10 times and killing 22 foreign race god kings, its aura weakened and its power decreased. At this moment, more than 20 foreign race god kings pounced over and surrounded it. Seeing that a divine sword that no one was controlling could move freely and unleash the battle prowess of a high-level god king, everyone was extremely shocked. However, they were also very curious and interested. Many of the foreign race god kings that surrounded it revealed greedy expressions. They looked at the Sword of Burial of Heaven with burning gazes. Although they knew that the Sword of Burial of Heaven was very dangerous, they could not restrain themselves. However, they were still unable to restrain themselves. They really wanted to obtain this mystical divine weapon. The Sword of Burial of Heaven knew that it would be very difficult for it to break free even if it tried its best to break free. Thus, it played along and pretended that it was not strong enough. Soon it was captured by 2 god kings. The 2 god kings used their capturing techniques and caught it at the same time. Although it struggled desperately, it could not escape from the 2 god kings' imprisonment. Could not help but let out a sword hum. Seeing this, the 2 god kings felt their blood boil. They did not hesitate to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven for themselves. However, the 2 foreign race god kings were evenly matched when they attacked at the same time. As soon as they saw this, the surrounding alien god kings were all stunned. They had never thought that their own people would actually start a fight over a divine sword. However, after thinking about it carefully, they did not feel that there was any problem. Because if they were the ones who caught the Sword of Burial of Heaven, they would also take it for themselves. Thinking of this, more than 20 foreign race god kings' eyes burned with passion. They had made up their minds. If the 2 Star Lords failed in their fight and the divine sword escaped, they would definitely snatch it. In any case, according to the heavenly strategies Starfield's usual practice, such spoils of war belonged to whoever managed to snatch them. Let go of this king. Star-Lord Santua, it was clearly this king who caught it first. Nonsense. It was this king who made the first move and caught this divine weapon. Then it belongs to whoever snatches it. Strength speaks for itself. When the 2 Star Lords fought over the Sword of Burial of Heaven, they did not forget to argue, but it was to no avail. The 2 continued to fight with all their strength. Finally, not far away, a god king who was on good terms with Star Lord Santua secretly helped him. Whoosh. Star Lord Santua's strength increased greatly, and he snatched the Sword of Burial of Heaven on the spot. The other Star Lord's giant palm of divine light directly collapsed, and he was also knocked back a few hundred meters. He was so angry that his face turned black and his body surged with killing intent. However, he could not kill his colleague in front of so many people for a divine sword. He could only grit his teeth and swallow this humiliation back into his stomach. After successfully snatching the Sword of Burial of Heaven, Star Lord Santua excitedly raised the Sword of Burial of Heaven and showed it to his colleagues. He excitedly shouted, "This divine weapon belongs to this king." However, just as he finished speaking, the sword of burial of heaven, which had dimmed and weakened, suddenly released a dazzling sword light. Whoosh! The sword of burial of heaven unleashed its full power and instantly pierced through Star-Lord Santuo's skull, shattering his mind and divine spark. Star-Lord Santuo was frozen on the spot. The vitality in his eyes disappeared and he died on the spot. At this moment, the sword of burial of heaven turned into a streak of black light and escaped the encirclement while the god kings were still in shock. After 1 second, everyone realized what had happened and immediately exclaimed and roared. Star-Lord Santuo is dead. Be careful, everyone. That divine sword is very strange. It's not weakened yet. It was just pretending to be weak. Don't be fooled by it. Oh my god. How can a sword be so cunning and capable? What kind of weapon is that? How can it be so smart? Although it's not an ultra-quality divine artifact, it seems to be alive and intelligent. It's definitely more valuable than an ultra-quality divine artifact. Everyone chase it. We can't let it escape. As everyone shouted, more than 20 god kings of other races chased after the sword of burial of heaven. Not far away, the dozens of god kings who were besieging Yunyao Jiku and the others were fuming with anger, but there was nothing they could do. Chapter 4039. We were all attacking these dozen or so godly kings and the 2 divine beasts. Yet you bastards only care about snatching that divine sword? Damn bastards, I will definitely report this to the domain lord later and let her punish you severely. These thoughts flashed through the minds of the dozens of godly kings who were attacking Yunyao and the others, and they became even angrier. However, they could not leave their posts, nor could they join in the commotion and chase after the sword of the burial of heaven. They could only grit their teeth and use all their skills to attack Yunyao and the others. However, Jiku used the power of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and formed a shield with 5 colored flames to protect everyone. The divine arts cast by the dozens of foreign race god kings landed on the barrier, but they were completely ineffective. Instead, Yunyao Jiku and the others' counterattacks landed on the crowd and caused a large number of casualties. The 2 sides fought high up in the sky for 100 breaths of time. Yunyao Jiku, Baifeng and the others were all injured. Their hair and robes were dyed red with blood. However, the dozens of godly kings suffered even more casualties. More than 20 of them were killed and another 20 were injured. If the battle continued, the remaining 20 or so godly kings would be killed by Yunyao and the others sooner or later. At this moment, the 100-man team from behind rushed over to support the surviving godly kings. Seeing that the situation was not good, Jiku decisively used the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and pulled everyone into the distorted spacetime. The intense battle just now came to an abrupt end just like that. Jiku also hid in the pagoda and used his mind to control the pagoda. He turned into a black light and fled into the distance. A moment later, the sword of the burial of heaven killed 2 godly kings and met up with the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Zhoosh! A white light flashed and the pagoda entered the sword world. The sword of the burial of heaven disappeared in front of everyone's eyes again. When the hundreds of godly kings rushed over, they missed again. Everyone was shocked and angry. They were so angry that they cursed and roared angrily. They had never thought that a mysterious black sword would be so cunning and difficult to deal with. At the critical moment, a white-haired, experienced Star Lord made a suggestion calmly. We can't go on like this. We can't trap that divine sword, but it's possible that it will kill us all one by one. We must report this to the domain lord and request the domain lord to take action. Everyone will join forces to destroy that divine sword and those dozen or so foreign race god kings. The 100 or so foreign god kings in the surroundings all calmed down from their greed and excitement. Everyone logically agreed with the white-haired Starlord's suggestion. Although they all wanted to obtain the divine sword, they wanted to preserve their lives even more. Shua. Seeing that everyone agreed, the white-haired Astral Lord took out a messaging jade strip and sent a message to the Heavenly Strategy Domain Master, who was 80,000 kilometers away. At the same time, the Region Master of the Heavenly Strategies region was leading over 60 high-level God Kings in pursuit of Ji Tianxing. This team was at the forefront, the closest to Ji Tianxing and Dao Xingyun. They were only about 35,000 kilometers away. The Region Master of the Heavenly Strategies region and these high-level God Kings were charging with all their might and would soon catch up with Ji Tianxing. However, they were obviously holding back. They kept following behind, pretending that they could not catch up with Dao Xingyun and Ji Tianxing. These people were not stupid. They were all cautious. They did not want to be punished by Dao Xingyun, but they also did not want to confront Ji Tianxing head-on. They only hoped that Dao Xingyun would kill Ji Tianxing as soon as possible and end this battle. At this moment, the region master of the Heavenly Strategies region received the white-haired Starlord's message. He immediately fell into a dilemma. A few of his trusted subordinates beside him saw his hesitation and asked, "Region Master, what happened? Is there anything we can do for you? Is there anything we can help you with?" The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region did not hide anything from them. He said truthfully, "A divine sword appeared behind the team. There were also a dozen of foreign races god kings. They have already killed dozens of our brothers. I am considering whether to continue chasing Kenshin or to deal with that divine sword." These subordinates were not stupid. While they were shocked, they also suddenly understood. A divine sword? Was it Kenshin's sword that was knocked away by Lord Supreme? The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region nodded. That trusted subordinate said with certainty, "If that's the case, then that divine sword can move freely as if it has a consciousness. It must be a peerless divine sword. Moreover, it seems that Kenshin's sword was knocked away. In fact, this might be Kenshin's scheme." After this person's reminder, the region master of the Heavenly Strategies region's eyes lit up. He suddenly had an idea. "Good. Then I will report this to Lord Supreme. I will now destroy that divine sword and destroy Kenshin's scheme. This can also be considered as helping Lord Supreme, right?" "Of course." His subordinates nodded in agreement. Thus, the region master of the Heavenly Strategies region sent a message to Dao Xingyun. After reporting the situation, he led the group of god kings and turned around to fly back. However, after flying for tens of thousands of miles and meeting the white-haired Star Master and the other god kings, they did not see any trace of the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region frowned and asked in a dignified tone, "Didn't you say that you were attacked by a divine sword and a dozen foreign races god kings? Where is that sword? Where did it go?" The white-haired Star Master's expression was bitter. He explained awkwardly, "Region Master, that divine sword is very cunning. Is hiding." The others also nodded in agreement. "Yes. That divine sword will only sneak attack us when we are unprepared. Once there are too many of us, it will run away." The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region's expression became more and more unsightly. He sneered, "It's just a weapon. Even if it has some intelligence, it can't have such intelligence and scheming. Is that sword too smart or are you too stupid?" No one could answer this question. More than 100 god kings' faces turned green. They stammered and could not explain clearly. The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region did not waste any time. He ordered in a deep voice, "Don't dawdle. Everyone gather together and be on guard at all times. All high-level god kings, use your divine abilities and secret skills to search for the divine sword." This method was indeed the wisest. More than 300 god kings gathered together and were on guard. Of course, the Sword of the Burial of Heaven did not know where to start. Moreover, the region master of the Heavenly Strategies region was a 9th-degree god king. Together with dozens of high-level god kings, they would definitely be able to find the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. But the problem was that the Sword of the Burial of Heaven had already left this place to meet up with Ji Tianxing. 500,000 miles away, Ji Tianxing and Dao Xingyun were still fighting. They quickly moved the battlefield, leaving behind fragments of heaven and earth along the way. Until now, the two of them were still in a stalemate. Neither of them was injured. But Dao Xingyun was full of confidence. He wanted to further undermine Ji Tianxing's confidence. He mocked and ridiculed, "As a Kenshin, you can't even hold your sword and were even sent flying. Kenshin, you don't deserve this name. Either change your name or kill yourself." Ji Tianxing sensed the Sword of the Burial of Heaven approaching quickly. The corner of his mouth hooked up into a playful smile. "The highest realm of the Sword Dao is to have no sword in hand, and the world is a sword. I don't need a sword to kill you. What's more, my sword is back." Chapter 40. When Dao Xingyun heard the first two sentences, he felt that it was true. Although he didn't major in Sword Dao, he also believed that Ji Tianxing's words were the truth of Sword Dao. But the last sentence made him freeze on the spot. "Your sword is back?" Dao Xingyun didn't know how to react. He thought that the sword had already been sent flying and fell hundreds of thousands of miles away. How could it be back? But a thought flashed through his mind and he suddenly recalled the events from 1,000 years ago. Instantly, his body shook and disbelief shot out of his eyes. Your sword, burial of heaven, is also resurrected? As one of the 5 people who besieged Kenshin and killed Kenshin, he naturally knew that Kenshin's sword was called Burial of Heaven. And in that Burial of Heaven sword, there was a sword soul called Burial of Heaven. The sword soul had spirituality and wisdom. However, after Kenshin died, the 5 god emperors personally destroyed the Burial of Heaven sword. Everyone believed that the Burial of Heaven sword was completely destroyed and couldn't be restored. Even when he saw Kenshin being resurrected and returning with an identical Burial of Heaven sword, Zhou Xian thought that it was a replica. After all, Kenshin being resurrected was shocking enough. How could the Burial of Heaven sword that had been destroyed for 1,000 years reappear? Now that he heard the sentence, he finally reacted. If the Burial of Heaven sword could return to Ji Tianqing's hands, it must be because of the Burial of Heaven sword soul. As expected. What happened next confirmed Zhou Xian's guess. Swoosh. A black light flew from the shattered sky and landed in Ji Tianqing's hands. Zhou Xian looked over. It was the sword of Burial of Heaven. Seeing the Burial of Heaven sword fly back with his own eyes, he could no longer suppress the shock in his heart. He exclaimed in disbelief, "It really is the Burial of Heaven. It had been destroyed for 1,000 years, so how could it be revived? Kenshin, how did you do it?" Ji Tianqing held the godly hammer in his left hand and the sword of Burial of Heaven in his right. He had regained his previous aura. Since the existence of the Burial of Heaven had been exposed, he no longer had to pretend to be weak. You want to know? Then I'll let you do it personally. He sneered and didn't say anything else. He waved his divine hammer and the sword of Burial of Heaven and launched a fierce attack on Zhou Xian. Life and death of the Thunder Sea. Sword of Destruction. The godly hammer shot out billions of lightning bolts, forming a colorful sea of lightning that rained down on Zhou Xian. The sword of Burial of Heaven absorbed the power of the 5 elements world and formed a giant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long. It slashed down from the sky. After fighting for so long, Ji Tianqing knew that it was time to end it. The Burial of Heaven had already told him about the situation of the foreign race's godly kings behind him. This was the best time to defeat them one by one. Rumble. Boom. Amidst the earth-shattering thunder, Zhou Xian formed a divine seal with both hands and released the power of the heavenly Tao. It formed a shield around his body to resist the corrosion of the sea of lightning. No matter how violent the divine lightning was, it couldn't break through his shield of the heavenly Tao. Although Zhou Xian would consume too much energy by doing so, it would accelerate the exhaustion of his energy. However, this was the safest and one of his most powerful defensive methods. After blocking the corrosion of the sea of lightning, Zhou Xian waved the silver dragon divine spear with both hands, thrusting out spear shadows to block the sword of destruction. He could feel that the sword of destruction was formed by a powerful force comparable to the power of the heavenly Tao. It was extremely terrifying. He didn't expect the silver dragon divine spear to be able to defeat the sword of destruction. He only hoped to reduce the power of the sword light. In addition to his shield of the heavenly Tao, he would definitely be able to withstand this sword. However, he still underestimated the power of the sword of destruction. Bam, bam, bam. Hundreds of silver dragon spear shadows crashed into the sword of destruction, but they couldn't withstand a single blow and collapsed. On the other hand, the sword of destruction's power and speed didn't decrease. It was still dazzling with golden light as it slashed down. Boom. Finally, the giant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long struck Zhou Xian. It wasn't that he didn't want to dodge, but the sword chi and invisible suppressive force had already firmly restrained him. Moreover, he had the shield of the heavenly Tao, so he was 80% confident. However, the reality was beyond his expectations. Amidst an earth-shattering sound, the shield formed by the heavenly Tao was actually broken by the giant sword. At that moment, Zhou Xian's eyes widened and his pupils constricted. Deep shock filled his heart. He finally realized that the special force that formed this sword light was the legendary power of the world. It was the magical power that could create everything and evolve the entire world from nothing. In the ancient legends, it was the power of the Creator, and it was comparable to the power of the heavenly Tao. It's over. I've overestimated myself. Dao Xingyun suddenly regretted it, but it was already too late. The dazzling golden sword light drowned his body. His sturdy and broad arm was instantly severed by the sword light, and a pile of debris splattered everywhere. This was an avatar, not a body of flesh and blood, so there was naturally no scene of blood splattering everywhere. However, Dao Xingyun's entire right arm was severed, and his arm shattered into pieces, splattering everywhere. Such a scene still sent chills down one's spine. In the next moment, the power of the sword light completely exploded, and Dao Xingyun was sent flying, rolling and crashing thousands of miles away. You deserve to die. Dao Xingyun, who was shocked and angry, let out a low roar like muffled thunder. This was the first time he had been injured in the battle with Ji Tianxing. Moreover, the injury was so serious that it accelerated the loss of his power, and his strength was also weakened. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to chase after Dao Xingyun and sneered. I've already said that your avatar will definitely die. Are you angry? Do you want to take revenge? Then let your real body come here personally. He had angered Dao Xingyun again because he wanted to test what Dao Xingyun's real body was doing. How important was it? Although the avatar of the god of the underworld had been destroyed, and the real body had not come to take revenge, he was already confident. However, Dao Xingyun's reaction confirmed his guess even more. As expected, Dao Xingyun shut up when he mentioned that his real body would come here personally. When he was sent flying for 800 miles, Ji Tianxing arrived in front of him again and slashed down with his sword again. Sword breaking 9 heavens. Next, the two of them fought fiercely in the sky and continued to move the battlefield. Although it was very difficult for ordinary sword skills to hurt Dao Xingyun. This could accelerate the depletion of Dao Xingyun's power and make his injuries worsen. Ji Tianxing also could not continuously use the Sword of Destruction in a short period of time. He needed some buffer time. In White Dragon's words, it was called skill cooldown. Finally, after the two of them fought for another 15 minutes, they moved the battlefield millions of miles away. At this moment, the region master of heavenly strategies caught up with more than 300 god kings. Ji Tianxing waved the burial of heaven again and used the Sword of Destruction. Dao Xingyun had not been able to dodge the previous sword strike. Now that he was severely injured and weak, it was even more impossible for him to dodge this attack. Boom. Crack. Under the gaze of hundreds of foreign race god kings, the huge golden sword slashed down on Dao Xingyun. Everyone saw with their own eyes that Dao Xingyun's body collapsed under the sword light. He was split into two and countless fragments flew out. Those fragments scattered in the shattered world, turned into pure divine power and quickly dissipated. Instantly everyone was dumbfounded. Chapter 40-41. For hundreds of years, the Heavenly Strategy Region Master and the other godly kings had held Lord Jizun in high esteem. In their knowledge, Lord Jizun was a supreme expert who had surpassed the godly king realm and was unparalleled. After witnessing what had happened today, the illusions and reverence in their hearts were shattered. First, Lord Jizun fought with Kenshin, who was a peak godly king. After fighting for so long, Lord Jizun was still unable to kill Kenshin, which made everyone feel surprised and disappointed. Then thousands of miles of heaven and earth were shattered and countless innocent people died. Lord Jizun could not do anything to Kenshin. Now it was even more ridiculous. Lord Jizun was hacked into pieces by Kenshin. The Heavenly Strategy Region Master and the other godly kings could not believe this scene. They could not accept that Lord Jizun, who was above the godly king realm, could not even defeat Kenshin, who was a peak godly king. Could it be that Kenshin had also surpassed the godly king realm and reached Lord Jizun's realm? No. Lord Jizun was also a peak godly king. He was not a Jizun. He had lied and deceived everyone. This thought flashed through the minds of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master and the other godly kings at the same time, and they believed it without a doubt. Their spiritual pillar had collapsed, and so did their faith and courage. Everyone was stunned as they looked at the pieces flying in the sky and fusing with the heaven and earth. They were not sad and they forgot about their fear. They were only shocked and in disbelief, and their expressions were complicated. Until the pieces in the sky dissipated, and the loud noise between heaven and earth disappeared. Ji Tianxing held the godly hammer and the sword of burial of heaven, and turned to look at the crowd. Only then did they regain their senses. Although Ji Tianxing did not do anything, his cold expression and the murderous aura that had not dissipated from his body gave the other godly kings a fright. Lord Jizun is dead. Everyone run. Even Lord Jizun could not defeat Kenshin. We are no match for him. Don't seek your own death. It's over. We can't escape this calamity. Lord Jizun, please think of a way. Don't hesitate, run. Kenshin is not alone. He has more than 10 companions. The god kings of other races who were filled with fear and anxiety all let out cries and shouts. A commotion broke out in the crowd. The god kings around the heavenly stratagem region master were still fine. Even though they were anxious and flustered, they didn't dare to run away. They all looked at the region master and waited for him to make a decision. However, at the very back of the group, the weaker and more heavily injured foreign god kings were already retreating. They were prepared to flee. This scene was rather comical and absurd. Over 300 divine king powerhouses were actually frightened to such an extent when facing Ji Tianxing alone, ready to flee at any time. This was simply inconceivable, extremely humiliating and laughable. The Heavenly Policy Region Master's expression was extremely ugly. He was both indignant and helpless. He looked around and glanced at the foreign god kings. He growled angrily, "What are you afraid of?" He was alone, so what was there to be afraid of? Don't forget, we still have over 300 people. A large number of ants can kill an elephant. If each of us stab him with a knife or a sword, it would be enough to kill him 10 times. What's more, he has been fighting with Lord Supreme Martial Artist for so long. He's already a spent force. Hearing his words, the god kings felt their faces burning. They all felt guilty and ashamed. At the same time, they regained some of their confidence. Even the god kings at the back of the group who were about to run away stopped in their tracks. They looked very hesitant. The region master struck while the iron was hot. He shouted in an impassioned tone, "Everyone, my brothers. This is the Heavenly Policy Star, our territory and home. We have nowhere to run, so we must protect its integrity and safety. Only if we join forces to kill Kenshin will everyone have a chance to live. Otherwise, everyone will be killed by him, and the entire Heavenly Policy Star field will be plunged into chaos. I believe that all of you know how serious the consequences are. Therefore, I ask that all of you follow me and join forces for one last time. If we can't win this battle, we will all be buried here." As soon as he finished speaking, the Heavenly Strategy Region Lord brandished his divine sword and took the lead to charge towards Ji Tianxing. He shouted loudly and his body burst out with blazing killing intent. It was like a ball of flame that streaked across the sky. More than a dozen of his trusted generals also raised their divine weapons and shouted hot-blooded slogans as they charged with him. Not far from him, many god kings were affected by his aura. They were also hot-blooded as they roared and attacked. However, the human heart was the most complicated and it was also the hardest to reach a consensus. Among the 300 god kings, 70% of them were hot-blooded warriors. However, there were still over 100 cowards. When over 200 god kings roared and charged forward, surrounding Ji Tianxing, there were over 100 god kings who turned around and fled. They sped up and fled into the distance. These god kings who were running away were not stupid. They did not go back the way they came, and they would not run back to the Heavenly Policy Divine Abode. They split into several groups and fled in different directions. Their goal was the same, which was to get away from Ji Tianxing and hide in a safe place. Then they would try to escape from the Heavenly Policy Star and return to the stars they ruled. Swish, 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 swish. Over 100 divine lights streaked across the sky and quickly disappeared into the horizon. The Heavenly Strategy Region Master and more than 200 divine kings had just formed a circle and surrounded Ji Tianxing. When the Region Master saw the 100 god kings running away, he was so angry that his face turned ashen and his body trembled. He wished that he could chase after them and capture them to behead them in front of everyone. However, those people ran very quickly and had already disappeared without a trace. The Region Master and more than 200 god kings had already started fighting with Ji Tianxing. They could not leave at all. Under such circumstances, he could only forcefully suppress his anger and remain calm. He swore in his heart that if he could kill Kenshin today and survive, he would definitely find those deserters and behead them in public. Rumble. Bam. 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 More than 260 god kings of other races used all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills to surround and attack Ji Tianxing. Divine techniques that blotted out the sky, sword and saber lights that blotted out the sky, as well as wind, fire and lightning, poured down like a torrential flood. Ji Tianxing's figure was drowned by all kinds of divine techniques, and a series of muffled sounds could be heard. On the surface, this battlefield covered an area of tens of thousands of miles. Heaven and earth were drowned in divine light, and it was extremely shocking. However, in reality, Ji Tianxing was completely unharmed under the intense tremors of heaven and earth. He had the protection of the primordial chaos bell and the indestructible golden body, so he could block 99% of the divine techniques. Occasionally, there were divine techniques that he could not block, but when they landed on his body they were like tickles. After a while, Ji Tianxing blocked the first wave of attacks from the God Kings and took the opportunity to counterattack. He let out a low roar and unleashed his ultimate trump card, the 10 directional vanishing shadows. 9 clones appeared around him. Swish, swish, swish. The 9 clones appeared in the sky and brandished the divine hammer and the sword of burial of heaven respectively as they attacked the surrounding God Kings. Chapter 40-42. Each of Ji Tianxing's doppelgangers had the battle prowess of a peak divine king. They could hold their own. Each doppelganger could deal with more than 20 divine kings of the foreign races. They could even kill those divine kings one by one without being defeated. The 9 doppelgangers had arranged for more than 200 divine kings of the foreign races. As for Ji Tianxing's main body, he was only going for the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. His goal was to kill the Heavenly Strategy Region Master first. The Heavenly Strategy Region Master was surrounded by 12 of his trusted subordinates. These subordinates were either the Heavenly Strategy Divine Residence's guard commanders, great generals, or the Star Lord of a certain star. The 12 of them were all high-level divine kings. They were brave, battle-hardened, and had a strong will to fight. Seeing Ji Tianxing charging at them, the 12 subordinates roared angrily. They charged forward without any regard for their own safety, protecting the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. Ji Tianxing did not put the 12 subordinates in his eyes. With a divine hammer in one hand and a divine sword in the other, he attacked with both hands. Swish, swish, swish. Boom. Dazzling sword lights flew everywhere. The deafening sound of thunder enveloped the 12 subordinates. Following a series of bang 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 sounds, a few divine kings were struck by the sword lights. Blood splattered everywhere. They screamed in pain as they were sent flying. The other few people had their heads and faces blackened by the thunderbolts. Black smoke rose from their bodies and they fell to the ground of the ruins. Both sides had only exchanged blows for a short while, but 9 of the subordinates were severely injured. The other 3 were slightly injured. They gritted their teeth and endured their injuries as they stood guard beside the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. Of course, the Heavenly Strategy Region Master was not idle. He found an opportunity to counterattack. Sword lights filled the sky as they pierced toward Ji Tianxing. However, before the sword lights could reach Ji Tianxing, they were blocked by the Primal Chaos Primordial Bell. The 10 tall primordial bell floated above Ji Tianxing's head. It shone with 5-colored divine light and formed an oval-shaped shield that protected Ji Tianxing. After shattering hundreds of sword lights, the 5-colored light barrier only trembled a few times but did not shatter. The region master of the Heavenly Strategies region was shocked and unconvinced. He still wanted to fight side by side with his 3 trusted aides to continue besieging Ji Tianxing. However, their attacks were easily neutralized by Ji Tianxing. On the contrary, it was Ji Tianxing who unleashed his divine ability that made 3 of his trusted subordinates bleed from their 7 orifices and pass out on the spot. Even the Heavenly Policy Domain Master was wounded by the sword light. Bloody holes appeared on his chest and back. Seeing that the situation was far from good, the Heavenly Policy Region Master panicked and retreated in a panic. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to pursue and attack. He swung the divine hammer and divine sword with all his might and cast all kinds of spells. The domain master of the Heavenly Strategy Domain was exhausted from defending himself. He was trapped in the whirlpool of sword light and thunderbolts, unable to escape. After just 7 moves, the Heavenly Policy Region Master, who was riddled with wounds, was cut into several pieces by the sword light. Blood splattered everywhere. The broken corpse fell from the sky, and a god head flew out from the head and fled into the distance in a panic. However, Ji Tianxing was prepared. He raised his sword and slashed it down, cutting the godhead into pieces. Crack. With a crisp cracking sound, the diamond-shaped godhead turned into a dozen pieces and fell from the sky. Just like that, the Heavenly Policy Region Master died before his 12 trusted subordinates. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a golden light to collect the godhead fragments of the Heavenly Policy Region Master. When he turned his head to look at the surrounding divine kings, he saw the 12 severely injured generals and a few divine kings of foreign races. Their faces were filled with fear. Obviously, everyone had seen the process of him killing the Heavenly Policy Region Master. Not long ago, Dao Xingyun's clone was killed by Ji Tianxing. Now the Heavenly Policy Region Master was killed as well. Their two pillars of support and leader had died one after another under Ji Tianxing's sword. This caused the already low morale of the divine kings to collapse completely. The Region Master is dead. Quick run. No one knew who shouted. His tone was too anxious and panicked, causing his voice to become shrill. Once this was said, the battle on the battlefield paused for a moment. Many divine kings of foreign races turned to look at the center of the battlefield, looking for the source of the shout. After knowing that the Heavenly Policy Region Master had been killed, everyone's heart skipped a beat. Their faces became panicked and they immediately lost the will to continue fighting. Many of them only made a few feints before retreating, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Panic and fear were contagious in the crowd and it spread very quickly. In the blink of an eye, more than 200 divine kings lost their will to fight. All of them tried their best to escape. Swish, 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 swish. Now that things had developed to this stage, no one cared about integrity and dignity. No one cared about the survival of the Heavenly Policy Star or the billions of people. There was only one thought in everyone's mind, and that was to escape as fast as possible and as far as possible. Ji Tianxing and his 9 avatars pursued, taking advantage of the opportunity to kill the fleeing divine kings. More than 200 people split into several groups and fled in different directions. This way their chances of survival would be higher. However, Ji Tianxing and his 9 avatars also split up, looking as though they would not let anyone go. As countless sword lights and lightning flashed, deafening explosions rang out, and the number of divine kings rapidly decreased. With every breath of time, a few foreign race god kings would be beheaded, their bodies pulverized. The muffled sounds of divine arts clashing and shrill screams echoed through the world. Ji Tianxing and his 9 avatars pursued the divine kings, picking up the quintessence fragments scattered in the sky. After an entire hour, this pursuit that spanned millions of miles finally ended. Not a single one of the 264 divine kings managed to escape. They were all killed. Ji Tianxing took all the quintessence fragments, interspatial rings and mediocre grade and superior grade king artifacts. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Ji Tianxing's main body stopped in a sea of clouds. He took out a divine elixir and consumed it. He silently circulated his divine arts and recovered his divine power. At the same time, his 9 doppelgangers rushed back from all directions. If those avatars did not carry any spoils of war, he could have used a secret technique to make the 9 avatars dissipate millions of miles away. However, each avatar carried a large amount of spoils of war, so they had to meet up with his main body. Very quickly, 45 minutes passed. The 9 avatars returned to Ji Tianxing's side. After handing over their spoils of war, they disappeared one after another. Ji Tianxing kept more than 260 quintessence fragments, interspatial rings, and more than 300 divine artifacts into his interspatial ring. There were too many spoils of war. After leaving Heavenly Policy Planet, he would find time to organize and count them. Currently, after circulating his divine arts and recuperating, he had recovered a lot of his divine power. His mental state was also full. Now he had to think about how to leave Heavenly Policy Planet. Although Dao Xingyun and the Heavenly Policy Region Master were dead, and more than 200 divine kings of the foreign races were also killed. However, Dao Xingyun's sky-shrouding formation still sealed off the entire Heavenly Policy Planet. There were nearly 10,000 divine sovereigns scattered all over Heavenly Policy Planet guarding more than 300 formations. They still did not know about Dao Xingyun and the Heavenly Policy Region Master's death. If they did not get rid of them, the sky-shrouding formation could still seal off Heavenly Policy Planet for many years. Chapter 40-43. Ji Tianxing stood in the sea of clouds and looked up at the sky. The boundless sky was covered by the five-colored light screen, and he couldn't see the end of it. Ji Tianxing used his God's Eye mystic technique to stare at the five-colored light screen and observe it carefully for a long time. He had to admit that Dao Xingyun's foresight, knowledge and attainments in array formations were indeed very shocking. Although the five-colored light screen looked like it was only 1 foot thick, the five-colored light screen covered the entire sky. However, the five-colored light screen that enveloped the entire heavenly policy planet was seamless and had no loopholes to speak of. If one wanted to use brute force to attack and destroy the five-colored light screen, no matter how powerful the attack was, it would be dispersed and dissolved by the light screen. In the end, the entire heavenly strategy planet would bear the brunt of the attack. In other words, unless Ji Tianxing could destroy the entire heavenly strategy planet in one move, he would not be able to break the five-colored light screen. Otherwise, no matter how powerful his ultimate skills were, he would not be able to break the five-colored light screen. The more than 300 divine arrays that were scattered all over the heavenly strategy planet were actually able to merge into one seamlessly after they started operating. There were no flaws at all. It was obvious how precise the 300-plus grand formations were. Such a flawless heaven-shrouding array cannot be broken by brute force. I can only find a way to break it. After a long while, Ji Tianxing looked away and muttered to himself with a serious expression. Since he wanted to break the heaven-shrouding array, he had to find a certain divine array and break through a node before finding a way to break it. Ji Tianxing decisively took action. He took out the supreme-grade king-grade god-slaying battleship and steered it toward the southwest. When he observed the five-colored light screen, he saw the hidden array network in the sky. That was also the path of the divine array's energy flow. One end of that huge array network extended toward the center of the heaven-shrouding array, while the other end extended toward the southwest. Ji Tianxing compared the geographical map of the heavenly strategy planet to that array network and guessed that there must be a divine array at the southwest border of this continent. The god-slaying battleship was extremely fast. It only took 6 hours to cross half of the continent. When the sun set, Ji Tianxing arrived at the southwest border of the continent. This place was a sea of dark green trees that covered the undulating hills, stretching as far as the eye could see. After passing through this sea of trees with a circumference of hundreds of thousands of miles, one would reach the dark golden coastline and see a large stretch of beach. If they continued forward, they would reach the vast sea. Ji Tianxing kept the god-slaughtering battleship and strode across the sky above the forest. He flew into the depths of the forest. As he advanced, he observed the five-colored canopy above his head. Although on the surface there was nothing unusual. However, he could see with his divine eye secret technique that the origin of the formation was in the depths of the forest. As it turned out, his judgment was correct. An hour later, he entered the depths of the vast forest and discovered an unusual place. There were two unusual details here. Firstly, this was just an ordinary forest. It wasn't a spirit vein or a holy land for cultivation. However, in this forest that stretched for hundreds of thousands of miles, divine power was abnormally abundant. Secondly, every hill and mountain in the sea of trees was covered by a dense forest, and there were many birds and beasts living in it. Only a few mountain ranges in the depths of the forest, which had a circumference of tens of thousands of miles, were unbelievably quiet. There was no sign of life. Ji Tianxing's intuition told him that this was the location of the formation. As expected, when he used his divine eye secret technique, he discovered that this area was enveloped by an invisible formation. An upper-grade king-level invisible formation sealed off an area with a circumference of 30,000 miles. This made it difficult for anyone who passed by this place to notice anything strange, unable to see any clues. Only a formation Dao expert like Ji Tianxing would be able to find traces of it. Boom. Crack. Ji Tianxing swung the burial of heaven without hesitation and slashed out a 1,000-foot-long sword light with all his might. With a thunderous explosion, countless fragments of divine light burst out from the seemingly empty sky. A huge hole was cut in the invisible divine formation on the spot. The invisible effect was broken, and the situation inside the formation appeared clearly before Ji Tianxing's eyes. The area with a circumference of 30,000 miles, which was supposed to be a mountain range and a sea of trees, had been flattened. There were densely packed gullies on the ground, forming billions of formation patterns that formed a heaven and earth formation. In the middle of the formation, There was a 5-colored altar that was 1,000 feet tall and 10,000 feet wide. 36 divine lords were sitting cross-legged around the altar. There were 3 circles inside and outside, and each of them was sitting in a specific position. These divine lords were concentrating on maintaining the operation of the altar and ensuring the stable operation of the heaven and earth formation. Of course, that tall altar was the eye of the formation that Zhou Xian had asked him to set up. There were 365 similar array eyes in every corner of the heavenly policy planet that connected so many heaven and earth formations to form the heaven and earth formation. Just as I expected. Xianxia walked through the gap in the invisible formation and swaggered towards the altar. He came from the sky with a dignified and sacred aura, and there was a cold smile on his face. The 36 divine lords who were concentrating on the formation were immediately awakened. When they saw Xianxia's appearance and felt his powerful aura and divine power, they were alert, and their eyes were filled with fear. Who are you? Why did you trespass into the forbidden area? Do you know that this is a capital offense? Lad, I advise you to retreat immediately. Otherwise, the region master will not forgive you. What are you waiting for? Quickly send a message to the commander so that the region master will know that someone has trespassed into the forbidden area. Obviously, these 36 divine lords were too lowly and did not know the truth of the matter. Their direct superior was a commander of the heavenly policy divine abode. With their status, they couldn't even meet the region master of heavenly strategies, let alone Zhou Xian. They only knew that they were ordered to guard this forbidden area and not allow anyone to trespass. They did not know the inside story at all. They did not know the effects of this forbidden area, nor did they know who the forbidden area was used to deal with. They also did not know that the region master and Zhou Xian had been killed. Xianxia looked at these divine lords calmly and said, "This has nothing to do with you. If you don't want to die, get lost now." If it was not necessary, he would not kill these lowly lackeys. However, these divine lords did not know how powerful he was, nor did they know his identity and purpose. Not only did none of them escape from the altar, but they all looked furious. They took out their divine weapons and surrounded Xianxia with murderous intent. "Lad, how dare you trespass into the forbidden area and still be so arrogant? Are you tired of living? A foreign race lad dares to behave atrociously on the heavenly policy star. You must be tired of living. Brothers, let's not talk nonsense with this guy. Let's just kill him. As the saying goes, the more people there are, the more courage there is." These divine lords knew that Xianxia was powerful, but they wanted to kill him with their numbers. Amidst the shouting and cursing, the crowd waved their divine weapons and attacked Xianxia. Chapter 40-44. Ignorant people are fearless. Xianxia only had 5 words for the bravery of the 30 divine emperors. When everyone was brandishing their weapons and attacking, he still stood with his hands behind his back and looked calm. He didn't take out any weapon, nor did he cast any spells. He only snorted and released invisible divine soul shockwaves, which formed dozens of invisible swords and stabbed at the divine emperors. Boom, 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 boom. On the surface, nothing happened in the sky. However, the divine lords who were charging forward were suddenly frozen in place. But in fact, every divine emperor's mind seemed to have been struck by lightning, and there was an earth-shattering sound. Then their minds were destroyed, their divine souls were killed, and their divine heads were shattered. Just like that, 36 divine emperors were killed. Their corpses stayed in the air for a brief moment, then fell to the ground with loud thuds, raising clouds of dust into the air. After killing the divine emperors easily, Xianxia didn't look at the bodies anymore and walked to the top of the altar. Even though no one was maintaining it, the altar was still operating normally and it was shining with colorful light. This heaven and earth array was closely connected to the heavenly strategy planet, and it absorbed endless divine power of heaven and earth and transmitted it to the heaven-shrouding array through the array. Xianxia stood at the top of the altar and performed the secret art of divine eye again. His eyes turned dark gold. He stared at the altar under his feet and the array patterns on the ground around it, and he observed them carefully. After a few breaths, he recognized that it was an upper-grade king-level heaven and earth array. More than 300 upper-grade king-level heaven and earth arrays combined to form an array that surpasses the immortal king level and is half a step away from the emperor level. Zhou Xian's idea is very clever. It's worth studying and learning. Ji Tianxing murmured to himself and continued to observe the structure of the heaven and earth array. When he held his breath and focused, the array no longer had any disguises and secrets. All the veins, nodes and structures were clearly visible. Ji Tianxing couldn't break a half a step away from the emperor-level array with his current power. But an upper-grade king-level divine array was a piece of cake for him. In just half an hour he had gained a thorough understanding of the heaven and earth grand formation. After pondering for a while he came up with 2 ways to break the spell. However, he did not directly break the formation. He had to think about another, more important question. It's not difficult to crack this superior king-level heaven-earth formation. I can finish it in an hour. However, what would happen after the formation was broken? Do I still have to travel all over the heavenly policy planet, find all the great arrays one by one and break them one by one? If he used this clumsy method he would definitely be able to break the heaven-shrouding formation, but it would take at least 3 months. Ji Tianxing didn't want to waste so much time, so he could only think and find a better solution. The first thing he thought of was to destroy the heaven and earth formation in front of him. After all, this formation was closely connected to the other 300 formations. If it could trigger a chain reaction, it could damage the other formations and cause holes and gaps to appear in the heaven-shrouding formation. However, Ji Tianxing thought about it carefully and felt that this method was not very reliable. It was easy to destroy a heaven and earth formation, but it was a fool's dream to spread the destructive power and affect the other heaven and earth formations. First, the destructive power would be dissipated by the heaven-shrouding formation and distributed to the other 300 formations, which would be withstood by the heavenly policy planet. Second, the destructive power would be greatly damaged and weakened during the process of transmission. Therefore, Ji Tianxing dismissed this idea and continued to think. After a while he thought of a second solution. Extract the world energy of the 5 elements world and force it into the heaven and earth formation. After destroying a great formation he could use his mind to control the world energy and destroy the other great formations through the veins of the great formation. However, on second thought this method was feasible, but it would consume a terrifying amount of world energy. Perhaps, the trillions of cultivation resources that he had spent to cultivate the 5 elements world would be wasted here. Helpless, Ji Tianxing thought of another way. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration flashed through his mind and he had a new idea. Instilling the world energy into the great formation consumes too much. If this doesn't work, then I'll use the heaven mending pearl to extract the power of the heaven shrouding formation. In any case, the heaven shrouding formation is supported by the world energy. The heaven mending pearl can extract the world energy to replenish itself and cultivate the 5 elements world. This method was, of course, the safest. Taking a step back, even if he couldn't successfully destroy the heaven shrouding formation, it would still be profitable. Ji Tianxing decisively took out the heaven mending pearl, placed it on the altar and began to cast the technique. Under his urging, the pearl-sized heaven mending pearl quickly expanded to the size of a millstone. The heaven mending pearl lit up with a sacred white light, releasing a terrifying devouring power that enveloped the entire altar. Swoosh! Immediately, the world energy absorbed by the altar rushed into the heaven mending pearl at an extremely fast speed. The heaven mending pearl devoured the world energy too quickly, causing a dazzling divine light vortex to appear around the altar. In such a situation, it was like a giant whale opening its bloody mouth to suck up the water in a pond. How could a mere 10,000 feet tall altar withstand the devouring of the heaven mending pearl? In the blink of an eye, the world energy in the altar was completely devoured by the heaven mending pearl. The altar sped up its operation, absorbing more world energy to maintain the operation of the formation. However, the speed at which the altar absorbed the world energy was dozens of times slower than the heaven mending pearl's devouring speed. The altar couldn't support the heaven mending pearl, so it couldn't support it anymore. It began to shake violently and cracks appeared on its surface, accelerating its collapse. Boom, boom, boom. As time passed, the altar shook more and more violently and began to shatter and collapse. In less than 10 breaths, the entire altar fell apart and the heaven shrouding formation collapsed. However, the heaven mending pearl's devouring didn't stop. The terrifying devouring power extended into the sky along the veins of the formation, greedily absorbing the 5-colored sky curtain's power. The 5-colored sky curtain above Ji Tianxing's head became thinner and dimmer at a speed visible to the naked eye. The power in this area was insufficient, so of course, it had to borrow power from other areas. As a result, the heaven-shrouding formation in other areas accelerated the absorption of the world energy to fill the weakness of the five-colored sky curtain. When Ji Tianxing activated the heaven-mending pearl with all his strength, the devouring power exploded to the limit. The two heaven-shrouding formations closest to him also began to shake violently, accelerating their collapse and collapse. The two heaven-shrouding formations were in the south and west of the continent, and they were also guarded by dozens of Sir-gods. However, those Sir-gods were dumbfounded, and they were helpless against this sudden situation. They could only watch as the altar collapsed. The facts proved that Ji Tianxing's plan had succeeded. This was a good start and it lifted his spirits. He continued to activate the heaven-mending pearl, crazily devouring the world energy. Next, the heaven-shrouding formations scattered all over the heavenly policy continent collapsed one after another. Chapter 40-45. When the heaven and earth divine arrays collapsed, the heaven-mending orb also absorbed a huge amount of heaven and earth divine power. Half of the divine power was purified by the heaven-mending orb and turned into pure energy that was absorbed by the heaven-mending orb. The other half was transferred to the five elements world by the heaven-mending orb, causing a divine power storm to sweep through the five elements world. The citizens of the five elements world were all excited when they saw the five-colored divine light that covered the sky and the five-colored spiritual liquid that filled the sky. The entire world began to expand and all living things grew wildly. Countless birds and beasts gained intelligence and entered a state of cultivation. As for the human martial artists and geniuses, they obtained unimaginable benefits and their strength and realm increased slightly. Next, as long as they cultivated diligently and absorbed the heaven and earth divine power, their strength would quickly increase. Those martial artists who were stuck in a bottleneck and could not break through in a short period of time also obtained a chance to advance. Without a doubt, after this divine power storm, another batch of divine spirits would appear in the five elements world. Compared to the huge changes in the five elements world, the heaven-mending orb also obtained great benefits, but the changes were not as obvious. It only became more dazzling and its aura was more complete and restrained. But other than that, there were no obvious changes. As time passed, the heaven-mending orb devoured more and more divine power, and its strength and aura were about to recover to their peak. But recovering to its peak was not the end. The heaven-mending orb's power would continue to increase. Unknowingly, 4 hours passed. Of the 300 or so heaven and earth divine arrays scattered all over the heavenly policy planet, more than 50 had already collapsed. These collapsed altars and heaven and earth divine arrays were not far from each other. Most of them were scattered on the same continent, and a few were at the borders of neighboring continents. The 1,000 or so monarch god experts guarding these arrays were all in a state of shock and confusion. They did not even see the enemy, nor did they know what was going on. After the altars and heaven and earth divine arrays collapsed, they did not know what to do, and could only report the news to their direct superiors and ask for instructions. But only now did they realize that they could not contact their superiors at all. No matter how many communication jade slips they sent out, they could not receive a reply. This situation filled the monarchs with shock and worry, and they had all kinds of bad guesses. Everyone realized that something big must have happened, but no one knew what was going on. For a time, everyone was in a state of panic and unease. The divine lords that were guarding the various arrays were contacting each other and asking about each other's situation. However, after a long discussion, they still couldn't come up with an answer. In short, they were very aggrieved, confused, and panicked. Ji Tianxing was still casting spells, and the heaven-mending pearl was still crazily devouring the divine power of heaven and earth. The five-colored canopy that sealed the heavenly policy planet began to expand from the center, and a slight change occurred. It was visible to the naked eye that the five-colored light curtain in that area had become thinner. The surrounding network of formations that extended out were like bulging blue veins, very conspicuous. After all, they were desperately absorbing the divine power of heaven and earth from other divine formations. But even so, the great heaven-shrouding formation was too big. The speed at which the veins of the great heaven-shrouding formation mobilized divine power was far from being able to keep up with the devouring speed of the heaven-mending pearl. Therefore, the heaven and earth divine formations were still collapsing one after another. Ping, ping, ping. Rumble. From time to time, loud, muffled booms could be heard from every corner of every continent on Heavenly Policy Planet. Every loud noise represented the collapse and destruction of a heaven and earth divine formation. There were even some divine lords who had slower reactions or were dumber. They tried to stop the collapse of the divine array and cast spells to block it. The result was no surprise. Their divine power was also completely devoured. Even if they sensed that something was wrong and desperately struggled and retreated, they couldn't escape. In the end, they were all devoured by the heaven-mending pearl and died on the spot. Their divine bodies also turned into ashes. Seeing the miserable end of those divine lords, the others didn't dare to go near the altar. They could only watch the altar collapse and the heaven and earth divine formations collapse. Time passed quickly. An entire day passed just like that. The world of 5 elements had obtained an immeasurable amount of divine power of heaven and earth. The divine power storm that enveloped the entire world would continue for a long time. The heaven-mending pearl had also recovered to its peak state and its power was still increasing. It seemed to have the potential to surpass a king-level divine artifact. Xianxia stopped casting spells and activating the power of the heaven-mending pearl. Because the more than 300 heaven and earth divine formations that formed the heaven-shrouding array had all collapsed and been destroyed. Those divine formations were the foundation of the heaven-shrouding array. Since the foundation was destroyed, the heaven-shrouding array no longer existed and was destroyed. The 5-colored light curtain that sealed the Heavenly Policy Planet had already been torn into pieces and turned into billions of divine light fragments that scattered around the world. Such a rare scene was witnessed by billions of people on the Heavenly Policy Planet. Countless people cried out in shock, worry, and confusion. No one could answer them. However, their worries and concerns were not unfounded. After a short while, an unexpected disaster swept across the entire Heavenly Policy Planet. Previously, the heaven-shrouding array had sealed the entire Heavenly Policy Planet and used more than half of the divine power of heaven and earth on the planet. Now that the heaven-shrouding array had collapsed and more than half of the divine power of heaven and earth had been sucked away by the heaven-mending pearl, the Heavenly Policy Planet had returned to its normal state. The result was obvious. The Heavenly Policy Star's spatial barrier began to crumble. Countless cracks appeared and densely packed gaps appeared. There were also violent vibrations between heaven and earth. The earth shook, jumped, and trembled, causing a terrifying earthquake. Several continents shook violently. The sky also began to collapse and crack. Countless spatial cracks appeared and a large patch of pitch-black void appeared. Rumble, bam, bam, bam. The eruption of a super-earthquake caused a series of chain reactions. Several continents were faced with tsunamis that blotted out the sky. The continental plates were also shattered. Vast mountains and rivers collapsed and shattered. Lava and volcanoes erupted violently from the planet's core, blotting out the sky. The space barrier shattered and the sky collapsed. Naturally, it was eroded by the void. A large patch of darkness began to appear in the sky above the Heavenly Policy Planet. Boundless spatial storms surged into the Heavenly Strategy Planet, wreaking havoc and destroying everything in their path. Such a terrifying disaster was equivalent to a natural disaster. If the Heavenly Policy Region Lord and a few hundred divine kings were still alive, they could still resist and resolve it. However, those divine kings were all dead. There were less than 30 divine kings left on the Heavenly Policy Planet. In the face of such a terrifying disaster, they were also helpless. They could only watch helplessly as a few continents shattered, as countless divine kingdoms collapsed and were destroyed. Tens of thousands of cities were destroyed by the void storms and the blazing divine fire. Chapter 40-46. Mountains and rivers were destroyed, homes were destroyed, and billions of alien life forms died in blood and fire, turning into ashes. That tragic scene played out everywhere on the Heavenly Strategy Planet. Even though Xianxia had left the Heavenly Strategy Planet and was in the void, he still couldn't bear to see the tragic scene. He could even hear faint screams and roars coming from the various continents. No one could calculate the casualties on the Heavenly Strategy Planet for the time being. However, Xianxia had observed more than half of the Heavenly Strategy Planet. He could roughly estimate the result from the damage done to a few continents. There were hundreds of billions of alien life forms on the Heavenly Strategy Planet. In this calamity, at least 80% of them were affected. Of these 80% of living beings, 70 to 80% were injured. The number of deaths should be no less than 30%. A rough estimate put the number of deaths on the heavenly strategy planet at more than 20 billion. Obviously, this could no longer be described as a disaster. It should be called a calamity. However, who could be blamed for this? On the surface, Ji Tianxing was the main culprit. If he hadn't destroyed the heaven-shrouding formation, this calamity wouldn't have happened. However, he was also a victim. He had only destroyed the heaven-shrouding formation to protect himself and escape. The real culprits were Zhou Xian, the heavenly strategy region lord, and the few hundred alien god kings. Looking at the tragic state of the heavenly strategy planet, Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. When he set up the heaven-shrouding formation, Zhou Xian had already made plans and preparations. Even if he had to destroy the entire heavenly strategy planet, he would still kill me. Although I killed his clone and ruined his plan, I also triggered a calamity and caused the heavenly strategy planet to be plunged into misery and suffering. If Zhou Xian knew about this result, he probably wouldn't be sad about the loss of the heavenly strategy planet. He would only be angry and regretful that he couldn't kill me. Such a tragic calamity will definitely alarm the heavenly Dao and send down its wrath, right? Thinking up to this point, Ji Tianxing looked up into the void and thought to himself, although I was forced to defend and only attack to protect myself, I still have a lot to do with this. However, I'm still involved in this huge karma. I should be punished by the heavens, right? According to past experience, even if the heavenly tribulation were to descend, it would only descend after the calamity was over. Thus, Ji Tianxing observed the heavenly policy star's movements and waited for the disaster to end. The flow of time seemed to have slowed down. Only half a day had passed, yet it felt so long. 12 hours later, the chaotic and calamitous heavenly policy planet gradually calmed down. Regardless of whether it was the shattered spatial barrier, the collapsed sky, or the collapsed earth, everything was gradually restored under the restoration of the heavenly Tao. Seeing that the disaster was over, the non-humankind beings who had just experienced blood, fire, suffering, and death, all cheered excitedly as if they had just survived the disaster. However, the sadness and heavy atmosphere still overshadowed the joy and excitement of surviving. Even though the disaster was over, the heavenly strategy planet was still in ruins. Countless souls had perished and blood flowed like rivers. The living people still had to treat the injured, settle the dead, and rebuild their homes and countries in the future. Of course, this was a long-term matter, so it would not be mentioned for now. In the dark and cold void, seeing that the calamity had finally subsided, Ji Tianxing raised his head and looked into the depths of the void, quietly waiting for the wrath of heaven to come. As expected, the heavenly Tao was furious. In the depths of the vast and boundless void, a dazzling blood-red light lit up, as if a raging fire was burning a prairie for thousands of miles. Amidst the blood-red light, there were billions of lightning bolts flashing and deafening thunder roaring. This was a sign of the heavenly Tao's anger. The blood-red light and billions of lightning proved the words furious. One could imagine how angry the heavenly Tao was. Ji Tianxing felt the mighty heavenly might and his pupils constricted. He could not help but tighten his grip on the burial of heaven's sword and divine hammer. He also activated the power of the indestructible golden body and the primordial chaos bell to the extreme. The wrath of the heavenly Tao naturally could not be avoided or resisted. Since he could not avoid it, he could only resist and resolve it with all his might. However, when the blood-red light surged and billions of lightning bolts formed red lightning pillars and bombarded him, he realized that something was wrong. Those tens of thousands of red lightning pillars were all bombarding the heavenly policy planet. Ji Tianxing, who was 200 million miles away from the blood-red light, seemed to have been forgotten and ignored. Not a single bolt of lightning or a single streak of bloody light struck him. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned with a puzzled look on his face. He did not understand. He should be one of the two people with the greatest karma and could be considered half of the culprit. Why didn't the heavenly Tao punish him? As for the tens of thousands of red lightning pillars that landed on the heavenly policy planet, they also scattered and landed everywhere. Those who were hit by the wrath of the heavenly Tao and the red lightning pillars were the 100 or so divine kings who ran away and the divine king overlords guarding a few continents. It was as if the heavenly Tao was angrily rebuking them. As overlords and guardians of the heavenly policy planet, you didn't save them and caused the deaths of billions of people. You should be severely punished. Not only were the divine kings who were struck by lightning and struck by the heavenly Tao dumbfounded, even Ji Tianqing was a bit dumbfounded. How did this happen? Ji Tianqing muttered to himself. Then an idea flashed across his mind as he thought of a possibility. Maybe this is just the first punishment of the heavenly Tao, just an appetizer. Let's punish those divine kings first. Next, the heavenly Tao will send down an even more terrifying punishment to punish me and Dao Xingyun. Thinking of this possibility, Ji Tianqing did not dare to let his guard down and continued to be vigilant. On the continents of the heavenly policy planet, the muffled sound of thunder sounded one after another. Those divine kings who were struck by lightning were already severely injured and were very weak. Now that they were being punished by the heavenly Tao, their fates were even more tragic. Almost 80% of the divine kings were killed by the heavenly Tao divine lightning on the spot and turned into ashes. Only about 20% of the divine kings were lucky enough to survive, but their injuries were extremely terrible and they were on the verge of death. The punishment of the heavenly Tao soon ended and the heavenly policy planet returned to normal. At this moment, Ji Tianqing looked at the bloody light with a serious expression. He had also accumulated his divine power to the maximum and was ready to attack. He thought that it should be his turn now. Unexpectedly, the bloody light gradually dissipated and the billions of lightning bolts surging in the bloody light also quickly disappeared. After a short 10 breaths, the strange phenomenon in the void dissipated. The void returned to its usual darkness and coldness, as if nothing had happened. The heavenly Tao's punishment ended just like that? The heavenly Tao actually didn't punish me? Ji Tianqing revealed a stunned expression. He only felt that it was incomprehensible and unbelievable. Even if he did not take the initiative to take action and cause the deaths of billions of living beings, he was still passively involved and indirectly created this calamity. The heavenly Tao actually did not punish him for such a huge karma? This did not make sense. It was fine if it did not punish him, but Dao Xingyun was the real culprit, a person who had committed the most heinous crimes, but the heavenly Tao actually did not punish him. What kind of logic was this? Chapter 40-47. Ji Tianqing felt that it was inconceivable and unreasonable. However, he definitely could not reason with the heavenly Tao, nor could he. The will of the heavenly Tao was so mysterious and hard to fathom. Ji Tianqing stood in the void for a moment and heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the void was completely quiet and that the heavenly Tao had no intention of getting angry again. It looks like the heavenly Tao will not punish me and Dao Xingyun. Why is that so? What are the criteria and basis for the judgment of the heavenly punishment? Ji Tianqing frowned and pondered, but he could not figure out this question. Thus he took out the god-slaying battleship and drove it into the depths of the void, planning to slowly think along the way. The heavenly policy star was still in turmoil and would take a long time to truly calm down. However, all of this had nothing to do with Ji Tianqing. He still had many things to deal with. Not only did he have to count the spoils of war, but he also had to refine the godhead fragments of the many god kings and absorb the memories of the heavenly policy region lord's divine soul. The god-slaying battleship flew at a moderate speed in the void. Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged in the cockpit, looking like he was resting with his eyes closed. As he controlled the god-slaying battleship, he took a king-level divine pill to recover his divine power. Previously, when he fought with Dao Xingyun and a few hundred god kings, he did not seem to be affected, but in fact he had expended a lot of energy. Now he could finally calm down and properly recuperate. Time passed quietly. 2 days later, Ji Tianqing took a divine pill and circulated his energy to recuperate. His mental state was obviously much better. At this time he had also guessed the reason and answer after much thinking and deduction. Above the God King realm, the so-called last step is to grasp the power of the heavenly Tao and interfere with the rules of the heavenly Tao. In that case, people like Dao Xingyun and the other 4 God Emperors are all top experts who can influence the will of the heavenly Tao. Thus, they can avoid the punishment of the heavenly Tao and not be punished by the heavens. However, I have not grasped the power of the heavenly Tao, nor have I reached the God Emperor realm. How can I be like them and avoid the punishment of the heavenly Tao? In the past, everyone and I performed meritorious deeds of saving the world. They were all rewarded by the heavenly Tao and obtained the power of merit, but I didn't. Now it seems that the heavenly Tao will neither reward me nor punish me. He should have completely ignored me. But perhaps I used the heaven punishment array to come back from the dead and jumped out of the scope of the heavenly Tao's rules. Even though Ji Tianqing's tone was probing and uncertain, he didn't seem to be sure. However, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that this answer was closest to the truth. Of course, whether this was the truth or not, at least he had proven one thing. The heavenly Tao would not reward him, but it would not restrict or punish him either. This made him feel even more confident and at ease. He gradually put aside this question, no longer thinking about it and feeling distressed. He began to sort out the spoils of war he had obtained from this battle. Firstly, there was the silver dragon divine spear and a spatial ring left behind after Dao Xingyun's avatar was destroyed. The silver dragon divine spear was a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact, and it was personally refined by Dao Xingyun. There was no doubt about it. Ji Tianqing used the power of the Nine Heavens divine cauldron and the divine hammer to forcefully erase the imprint and soul aura on the silver dragon divine spear, completely severing its relationship with Dao Xingyun and becoming an ownerless treasure. Then he entered the distorted spacetime and gave this supreme-grade king-level divine spear to Ji Ku. Cuckoo, you've always used the divine spear as a weapon so you can unleash greater combat strength. The divine spear I refined for you previously was only a medium-grade king-level divine artifact, so it will limit your combat strength in the future. This silver dragon divine spear is for you. It's enough for you to use forever. Refine it well. Ji Ku was naturally pleasantly surprised and excited. She wanted to decline, but she knew that Ji Tianqing was sincerely giving it to her, and no one was more suitable than her for this divine spear, so she accepted it. Ji Tianqing left the distorted spacetime and went to check the interspatial ring of Dao Xingyun's incarnation. The interspatial ring worn by the incarnation was far inferior to that of Dao Xingyun's original body. The resources and wealth stored in it were also incomparable. Even so, Ji Tianqing found 2 trillion worth of cultivation resources from the interspatial ring. There were also dozens of medium-grade and high-grade king-level divine artifacts, thousands of king-level divine pills, and some strange divine items. Ji Tianqing put all these cultivation resources and divine artifacts into his own interspatial ring and put them away in different categories. They might be of use in the future. Then he continued to check the interspatial rings of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master and the 300 or so foreign race divine kings. In comparison, these interspatial rings were even poorer and shabbier. They could not be compared to Dao Xingyun's interspatial ring. Other than the interspatial ring of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master, there were also cultivation resources worth a few trillion, as well as a batch of priceless divine artifacts and pills. In the interspatial rings of the few hundred foreign race divine kings, there were usually only tens or hundreds of billions worth of resources. However, wealth had always been something that could be accumulated from small amounts to a large amount. In the interspatial ring of a foreign race divine king, there were only a few hundred billion worth of resources. The amount of resources and wealth accumulated in the 300 or so interspatial rings was very shocking. Ji Tianqing made a rough estimate. A conservative estimate would be around 200 trillion, which would be 200 trillion after conversion. Originally, he had planned to pick out some king-level resources and divine artifacts and leave them in his interspatial ring. The rest would be absorbed by the Five Elements world. However, the Five Elements world had already benefited greatly. The divine power storm was still ongoing. Even if he invested 200 trillion worth of resources, it would only be icing on the cake. Therefore, Ji Tianqing stored these cultivation resources in his interspatial ring first. He would distribute them later. It was worth mentioning that he only had one interspatial ring in the past. Ever since he saved more than 10 stars and picked up a large number of star fragments and crystals, the interspatial ring was almost full. Now that he had obtained so many resources, he could only refine a high-grade king-level interspatial ring to store resources and treasures. Therefore, he wore the interspatial ring on both his index fingers. Fortunately, these 2 interspatial rings were as black as ink. They were simple and unadorned. They did not look funny. It was already 3 days later when he finished counting the spoils of war. At this time, the god-slaying battleship flew past a waste star. Therefore, Ji Tianqing piloted the god-slaying battleship and landed on the waste star. He hid in a remote area of the waste star and took out the Jutian 10 Absolutes pagoda. He entered the distorted space-time to refine the quintessence fragments. After the battle on the Heavenly Strategy planet, he had accumulated 400 quintessence fragments of divine kings. The first thing he wanted to refine was naturally the quintessence fragment of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. Not only was the Heavenly Strategy Region Master the strongest, but he also wanted to extract the memories of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master to investigate clues related to the Heaven-Sealing Dragon Emperor. Chapter 40-48. In the distorted spacetime under the blood-flame sacred tree, Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged, circulating his energy to refine the quintessence fragment of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master. Not far from him, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Ji Wushuang, and Ji Wuhan were circulating their energy to heal their injuries and cultivate. On the other platforms under the sacred tree, Chao Qingyu, Yang, and the others were circulating their energy to heal their injuries. Those who had participated in the battle on the Heavenly Strategy Star were all severely injured. Fortunately, the Sword of Burial of Heaven and Jiku had protected them and prevented them from dying at the critical moment. Although their injuries were quite serious and required a long time to heal, it would take them a few decades to 100 years. However, after experiencing that battle, they had gained a lot of combat experience and their foundation of the Divine Tao was more stable. Every expert had to go through the tempering of blood and fire before they could truly grow. They had the most suitable cultivation illusory realms and the most abundant cultivation resources. They also had many companions to discuss and verify their cultivation path. They even had a top expert like Ji Tianxing to protect them. In addition, they had been tempered by the battles of the God Kings. Under such circumstances, how could they not work hard and improve their strength rapidly? Unknowingly, the god-slaying battleship had sailed in the void for an entire day. 50 days had passed in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianxing had already refined the quintessence fragment of the Heavenly Strategy Region Master and absorbed his memories. After sorting out the Heavenly Strategy Region Master's memories, he obtained the information he wanted. However, he felt a little regretful that the Heavenly Strategy Region Master had never heard of or seen the Heavenly Strategy Dragon Emperor. In the past 1,000 years, a few major events had happened in the Heavenly Strategy Star region, and they were all related to peak god kings. However, none of them were related to the Heavenly Strategy Dragon Emperor. In short, the disappearance and death of the Heavenly Strategy Star region definitely had nothing to do with the Heavenly Strategy Star region. In addition to this information, Ji Tianxing also learned many secrets about the Heavenly Strategy Star region and Dao Xingyun. For example, how did Dao Xingyun subdue the Heavenly Policy Domain Lord and support him to firmly control the entire starfield? Another example was the situation of the many stars in the Heavenly Strategy Starfield, and how the non-human beings in the entire starfield worked and pledged their loyalty to Dao Xingyun. As for Dao Xingyun, the mystery of the Grey Mist and the other 4 god emperors, the Heavenly Strategy Region Master's status was too low to know. After refining the Heavenly Strategy Domain Lord's Godhead fragment, Ji Tianxing temporarily stopped cultivating. He had to carefully consider this issue and make a decision as soon as possible. The 5 god emperors all know that I have been reborn and have regained the strength of a peak god king. They also know my path forward. Therefore, Dao Xingyun had set up an ambush in the Heavenly Policy Star field a few months in advance. The other god emperors would definitely be prepared for the next few star fields. They would definitely not sit still and wait for death. Most likely, like Dao Xingyun, they would gather hundreds of god kings in advance and set up an ambush, waiting for me to step into the trap. In the near future, Ji Tianxing's strength did not increase or break through significantly. If another battle similar to the battle on the Heavenly Policy Star occurred, he would still not be able to defeat his opponent alone. He would still need the help of Yun Yao, Jiku and the others. As for Yun Yao, Jiku and the others, they were still in a severely injured state and were still recuperating in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianxing knew that now was not the time to head to the next star field. If he rushed there rashly, he would most likely have to fight alone and his life would be in great danger. After all, the god emperors were not weak. They all had powerful strength and methods. Even if he could deal with one god emperor's clone, he would not be able to deal with hundreds of god kings. Even if Yun Yao, Jiku and the others recovered from their injuries and assisted him in the battle, the other god emperors might very well join forces to set up an ambush. If 2 god emperors' clones joined forces and hundreds of god kings from other races helped, there was a high chance that he, Yun Yao and the others would be killed. With this in mind, Ji Tianxing decided to temporarily avoid the brunt of the attack and plan for the long term. He wanted to bring everyone to a safe place where they could recuperate and improve their strength in peace. When everyone was fully prepared, he would act according to the circumstances. At first, Ji Tianxing wanted to leave the heavenly policy starfield and find a place to hide in the vast void. However, when he looked into the dark and cold void, he suddenly saw a bright golden sun in the depths of the distant void. It was an incomparably huge golden star. It floated alone in the void, emitting an endless sacred golden light that illuminated the various star fields. Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment before he reacted and recognized that golden star. He immediately revealed a look of relief and a smile appeared on his face. That's one of the eternal stars, the divine realm. Back then, when he set off from the dragon realm, he crossed the void and crossed one star field after another. When he was about to reach the heavenly policy star field, he was already more than halfway there. The heavenly policy star field and the heavenly leader star field were very close to the divine realm. He already knew this when he was still a Kenshin. However, he had always been thinking about exploring the 9 star fields and finding the mystery of his master's death, so he did not pay attention to the divine realm. Now that he saw the divine realm again, he immediately had an idea. Why should he find a place to recuperate in the void? If he returned directly to the divine realm, not only would he be able to recuperate in peace, but he would also be able to deal with many matters. For example, he could destroy the foundations of the 5 God Emperors' forces and gather the old subordinates and remaining forces. The 5 God Emperors' bases were in the divine realm, and they each controlled 5 continents. They also left many trusted experts to help them guard their bases. However, the 5 God Emperors' true bodies were deep in the void, studying the mystery of the gray fog. Their clones must be lying in ambush in the heavenly crane, heavenly phoenix and other star fields, waiting for Ji Tianxing to walk right into their trap. As such, the divine realm was naturally empty. At the very least, the God Kings and Peak God Kings guarding the divine realm would definitely not be able to withstand Ji Tianxing's attacks. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing left the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower and appeared in the cockpit of the God-slaying battleship. He sat cross-legged on the disc array and controlled the God-slaying battleship to change direction and fly toward the divine realm. At the same time, he took out a large number of divine pills and elixirs to heal his injuries and cultivate. Although the divine realm could be seen clearly from the heavenly policy star field, it seemed as if the distance between the two was not far. In reality, the distance between the two was more than 100 billion miles. Even with the God-slaying battleship's speed, it took half a year to reach the vicinity of the divine realm. Only when he was close could he feel the majesty and vastness of this eternal star. This eternal star with a diameter of 10 billion miles was completely enveloped by a golden barrier. It was the strongest spatial barrier in the world. No matter how terrifying the meteorites were, they would not be able to destroy its protective layer. Unless the heavenly Tao collapsed or an extraordinary power destroyed it, this star would be eternal and indestructible. Ji Tianxing was filled with anticipation and hope as he drove the God-slaying battleship straight toward the divine realm's golden barrier. Divine realm, I'm back. When I left the divine realm, I was chased by many god kings and was forced to flee to the dragon realm. This time, not only will I avenge my past humiliation, but I will also turn the divine realm upside down. Chapter 40-49. Zhou. The god-slaying battleship passed through the golden light barrier and entered the god realm. Amidst the flickering light, the god-slaying battleship entered the god realm. The blue sky and clear water appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. Although he did not know which continent was in front of him for the time being. But after more than 20 years seeing the scenery of the god realm again, he still felt somewhat emotional. In his previous life and this life, after the experience of 2 lifetimes, he had been calm and peaceful in the dragon realm, and it was smooth sailing. Only in the god realm did he experience so many ups and downs. And this time when he returned to the god realm, he would never be like before, and he would not let the tragedy repeat itself. He never forgot that when he fled the boundless heaven continent back then, those ancient clans that secretly helped him were still waiting for his triumphant return. The Jiang clan that would never be an ungrateful person. The war god clan that was hot-blooded and forthright, waiting for him to spar and fight. And the Lan clan that had deep brotherly love. And the 100 Refinement ancient sect that was waiting to exchange the 100 Refinement divine hammer blueprint with him. Swoosh. Ji Tianxing was full of confidence and anticipation as he steered the god-slaying battleship across the sky, heading straight ahead. There were endless mountain ranges all around, covered with lush forests. One could clearly hear the sounds of many birds and beasts. The god-slaying battleship turned into a stream of light, flying across the sky with lightning speed, 10,000 miles in an instant. An hour later, the god-slaying battleship flew out of the vast mountain range and forest, and finally saw a certain city of the god race nation. Ji Tianxing kept the battleship and entered the city alone, asking around for information. After asking around, he found out that this was Surging Sun City, the territory of True Sun Divine Nation and Qianfeng Empire, belonging to the Maple Water region, the territory of the Boundless Heaven continent. This answer made Ji Tianxing even more emotional, revealing a trace of a complicated smile. When I ascended to the God realm back then, I appeared in the Boundless Heaven continent. After so many years, I returned to the God realm again, and it's actually the Boundless Heaven continent again. Fate is really strange. He could only think that perhaps this coincidence was the will of the heavens. Since he landed in the Boundless Heaven continent, then he would pick up his old path and sweep through the entire God realm from the Boundless Heaven continent. Of course, he was not in a hurry to destroy the forces of the 5 God emperors. Ji Tianxing needed to find a safe place to recuperate and cultivate in seclusion for a period of time. It just so happened that the Maple Water region he was in was located in the center of the Boundless Heaven continent. Ancient clans from several grotto heavens in the surrounding regions had helped him when he escaped from the Boundless Heaven continent. As for the reason, it was naturally because he had shown great kindness to those ancient clans in the past. Ji Tianxing steered the god-slaying battleship and flew east for half a day. He left the Maple Water territory and entered the Raging Flame territory. It took him a while to find Yensu's paradise. This cave was located in the center of the Raging Flame territory. It was hidden deep inside a primitive forest and a mountain range. Almost no one had ever set foot here. The entrance to the grotto heaven was invisible and sealed. Without the guidance of the people from Yensu's grotto heaven, no one from the outside would be able to find it. Ji Tianxing also spent some effort to find this place. After all, he had been to Yensu's cave before and stayed there for about half a month. The ancient clan that occupied Yensu's cave was called the Nangong clan. It was an ancient clan that had inherited the legacy of the ancient times. More than 1,000 years ago, Kenshin was asked by a friend to come to Yensu's cave to help the Nangong clan. At that time, the Nangong clan was in trouble, but they were unable to solve it. Kenshin's arrival gave some of the clansmen hope. However, there was another half of the clansmen who did not have confidence in him and treated him as a swindler. There was even a part of the clansmen who wanted to banish him from Yensu's cave. Kenshin used his own methods and abilities to convince those who opposed him, ostracized him and wanted to banish him. Then he used his superior wisdom and methods to solve the crisis of the Nangong clan and help the Nangong clan to overcome the crisis. At that time, the entire Nangong clan was shocked. Half of the Boundless Heaven continent knew about the news and felt it was unbelievable. From then on, the Nangong clan had formed a deep friendship with him. The clan leader of the Nangong clan even deliberately tested Kenshin and wanted to marry his daughter to Kenshin, even as a concubine. In this way, not only could he thank Kenshin for saving his life, but he could also deepen his relationship with Kenshin. After all, the daughter of the clan leader of the Nangong clan had also developed feelings for Kenshin after a few days of contact. However, Kenshin rejected the Nangong clan's good intentions. After staying in Yensu's cave for more than 10 days, he left. Previously, Ji Tianxing was chased by the experts under the Azura God Emperor in the Boundless Heaven continent. He thought that he would not be able to escape. He did not expect that at the last moment, there were many ancient clans that secretly helped him. The Nangong clan of Yensu's cave was among them. At that time, Ji Tianxing was also surprised. He did not expect the Nangong clan to still remember the kindness of the past. This time, when he returned to the Boundless Heaven continent, he chose to go to Yensu's cave for 2 reasons. Firstly, Yensu's cave was the closest. Secondly, he trusted the Nangong clan. The entrance of Yensu's cave was protected by a king-level divine formation. It was in an invisible state. Dozens of God Lord Realm guards, led by 2 God King experts, guarded the entrance firmly. Ji Tianxing landed in the sky above a large canyon. He waved his palm and shot out a few divine golden lights, which landed in the canyon. Bam bam bam. Following a few muffled sounds, the canyon lit up with a dazzling divine power radiance. A formation plate with a radius of 10 miles appeared. On the colorful formation plate, there were hundreds of millions of formation veins and dozens of guards. In the middle of the formation plate, there was a blazing white light door that was 100 feet tall. It was in a closed state. Originally, the dozens of guards and the two commanders were resting. Suddenly being attacked, the formation was activated. Everyone was startled awake and subconsciously gripped their divine weapons tightly. Everyone's gaze gathered on Ji Tianxing, who was in mid-air. Ji Tianxing did not dodge either. He showed himself openly and flew toward the five-colored formation plate. When he arrived at the edge of the formation plate, the two God King Realm Guard commanders shouted in unison, "Who are you? Why are you trespassing into Yanshu's cave?" For the past few hundred years, Yanshu's cave had been in a closed state. The disciples of the Nangong clan would not come out if they did not encounter any major issues. This was the order of the Nangong clan head. It was also some kind of wisdom. Currently it was to avoid disaster. Because the Nangong clan head spent decades of effort to divine and deduce a trace of heaven's secret. He had a premonition that the boundless heaven continent would have a huge turmoil. Because of this, no one would come to Yanshu's cave for decades. Suddenly, a white-robed youth appeared. Without saying a word, he directly cast a spell to activate the defensive formation. The guards were of course alert and full of vigilance. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing appeared very magnanimous and did not have any sneaky appearance. He looked at everyone with a calm expression and reported his name and purpose of coming. When the two guard commanders heard, they were immediately stunned. Chapter 40-50. Kenshin's name reverberated like thunder in one's ears. As the publicly acknowledged #1 expert in the divine world and the youngest peak divine king, his life could be said to be legendary. It was no exaggeration to say that thousands of years ago, many cultivators and deities idolized him and imitated him. Almost 70 to 80% of the cultivators who were born 1,000 years ago had heard of his name and knew of his deeds. Even ordinary people were like this, let alone the Nangong clan who had received his favor and even seen his true appearance. It was not hard to imagine how the dozens of guards and the two guard commanders would feel and react when they heard that the sword god Long Tian was here to visit the Nangong family's patriarch. Everyone was stunned on the spot and looked at Ji Tianxing with their mouths agape. They only reacted after a few seconds of hesitation. He said, "You're Kenshin?" The red-haired middle-aged guard commander on the left asked with a stutter. "Are you really, Kenshin?" The guard commander on the right with black wings was emotional as he stared at Ji Tianxing with his bright eyes. The dozens of guards were even more so. All of them widened their eyes and stared at Ji Tianxing with bated breath. That blazing gaze was like that of a fanatic worshipper who had seen his idol. Everyone's hearts were in their mouths as they waited for Ji Tianxing's reply. They were afraid that he would deny it or say no. Although it was hard for everyone to believe that Kenshin, who was equivalent to a legend, would suddenly visit Yanshu Grotto Heaven. However, everyone was looking forward to it, afraid that it was a misunderstanding or a farce. The two guard commanders had a serious expression as they reminded Ji Tianxing in a serious tone, "You should know that Kenshin is now a wanted criminal in the boundless heaven continent, a criminal with a huge reward. If you impersonate him, don't blame us for capturing you and handing you over to the territorial master." Obviously, the two guard commanders were not blinded by the surprise and did not want this to turn into a farce. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianxing nodded calmly and said, "I am Kenshin Long Tian, the real deal. Quickly report to your clan master." After receiving his affirmative answer and seeing his calm expression, unfathomable aura and smooth aura, many of the guards instantly believed half of it. In their hearts and fantasies, a peerless genius and expert should have such a bearing and demeanor. Therefore, one guard commander nodded and said, "Please wait for a moment, we will report to our clan master now." After he finished speaking, the guard commander took out a communication jade slip and reported the news to the Nangong clan patriarch. Of course, he repeated Ji Tianxing's description and words to the clan master. After the announcement, everyone fell silent. What followed next was a quiet wait. Although many of the guards were excited, many of them were looking at Ji Tianxing curiously, whispering to each other in secret. However, before confirming Ji Tianxing's identity, no one came up to him or tried to curry favor with him. Even if these people worshipped Kenshin, the Kenshin was a legend from 1,000 years ago. He had disappeared without a trace in the last 1,000 years. Even if the Kenshin's name had spread across the boundless heaven continent a few decades ago, it was still news of him being surrounded by many experts and forced to flee in all directions. Most importantly, the boundless heaven continent was now under the control of Emperor Shura. The experts under Emperor Shura's command viewed Kenshin as the #1 criminal. These guards did not dare show too much affection and worship, lest they cause trouble for the Nangong clan. After all, the Nangong clan had closed their paradise and not left it or entered the world for more than 200 years in order to hide from disaster. Since no one took the initiative to speak, Ji Tianxing also remained silent and waited quietly. Normally, the Nangong clan patriarch should have replied in half an hour. But after waiting for half an hour, there was still no news from the Nangong clan patriarch. There was no movement at all. Therefore Ji Tianxing frowned in puzzlement. The two guard commanders and the many guards also began to mutter in their hearts. They began to make guesses and discuss through sound transmission. What's going on? Why is there no news from the patriarch even now? Yeah. The patriarch achieved great success half a month ago and came out of seclusion not long ago. He can't be cultivating in seclusion again, can he? Could this Kenshin be a fake? The patriarch knows that something is wrong and is gathering the experts of the clan? It's very likely. I think the patriarch is gathering the elders to discuss countermeasures. If this Kenshin is a fake, should we make a move and capture him first? Don't be rash. Even if he's a fake Kenshin, he's still a real God King expert. If we act rashly, we won't have the advantage. Right. You calm down, better wait for the patriarch's orders. The many guards discussed through sound transmission in secret. Their gazes when looking at Ji Tianxing also gradually became vigilance and suspicion. Right at this time, the white light door that had been closed all along suddenly opened from the inside. Swoosh. Amidst the flickering white light, a middle-aged divine race man who was over 10 feet tall and had a stalwart build stepped out of the light door. This person was dressed in a blue brocade robe and wore a luxurious crown on his head. His entire body emitted the dignified aura of a superior. His face was dignified, square face, wide nose and a wisp of beard on his lower jaw. His thick brows and big eyes looked rather refreshing. When the guards around the white light door saw this middle-aged man appear, they all bowed and saluted in unison, saying in unison, "Greetings to the patriarch." Without a doubt, this majestic blue-robed man with a majestic gait was precisely the Nangong clan's patriarch. He ignored the surrounding guards. After stepping out of the light door, his gaze landed on Ji Tianxing, sizing him up carefully. When he saw Ji Tianxing's appearance clearly and sensed Ji Tianxing's aura, he immediately revealed a joyful smile. However, before he could greet Ji Tianxing, those guards still maintained their saluting posture. At this time, the light door flickered with white light again and several figures appeared. One after another, middle-aged and elderly divine race men dressed in brocade robes with dignified and graceful appearances appeared on the disc array one after another. When the guards saw these God King experts, they still maintained their saluting posture and shouted in unison, "Greetings to the elders." Clearly, those 7 middle-aged and elderly God Kings were the Nangong clan's elders. No one would have thought that the Nangong clan's patriarch did not reply for so long, not because he suspected that Kenshin was an impostor. Instead, he had gathered the elders and personally came to the Grotto Heaven's entrance to welcome Kenshin. Understanding this point, the blood of the guards boiled with excitement. Their emotions were agitated to the extreme. All of their guesses and suspicions vanished into thin air at this moment. Everyone's eyes when looking at Ji Tianxing recovered their passion and adoration. At the same time, the Nangong clan's patriarch suppressed his agitated emotions and quickly walked in front of Ji Tianxing. He cupped his hands and saluted him. "Kenshin, long time no see. We've finally waited for your return." Chapter 40-51. More than 1,000 years ago, news of Kenshin's death spread throughout the god world. Many factions, including the Nangong clan as well as Kenshin's admirers, were shocked, incredulous and regretful. But that was all. After all, ancient clans like the Nangong clan had only received his favor and were not his relatives. But in these 1,000 years, the 5 god emperors ruled the 5 continents of the god world and enslaved hundreds of millions of people. Almost all of the general public and common people lived in an abyss of suffering, restricted in every way and extremely difficult. This was especially so for the various ancient clans. They had once been high and mighty rulers of all living things, but now they were reduced to obscure supporting roles. They could only live in seclusion and avoid the world. Their hearts were filled with anger and unwillingness, but there was nothing they could do. Many ancient clans had thought of rebelling and overthrowing the dark rule of the 5 god emperors. But they did not have the guts, much less the strength. If they acted rashly, they would definitely be destroyed by the 5 god emperors and their fates would be tragic. Thus, they had been enduring silently, waiting for an opportunity. Until more than 20 years ago, news of Kenshin's rebirth and Kenshin's reappearance spread from the boundless heaven continent. Many ancient clans saw a glimmer of hope. Their spirits were lifted and they were filled with hope and expectation. Thus, many ancient clans rushed to help Kenshin, hoping that Kenshin could escape the pursuit of many experts. Because they knew that Kenshin had a blood feud with the 5 god emperors and would fight the 5 god emperors to the death no matter what. Even if Kenshin was not strong enough and could not fight against the 5 god emperors. But as long as Kenshin lived, there was still hope. That secret rescue successfully helped Kenshin, allowing him to smoothly escape from the boundless heaven continent. While many ancient clans breathed a sigh of relief, they were also incomparably expectant and silently looking forward to Kenshin's early return. They were well aware that when Kenshin returned to the god world and the boundless heaven continent, it would be the beginning of revenge. Today, the Nangong family had received a report from a guard that Kenshin Ryushin had arrived. The moment he heard the news, the head of the Nangong family, who was meditating in the secret chamber, jumped up in excitement and couldn't help but wave his fist. Fortunately, he was the only one in the secret room, and no one saw him so agitated and lost his composure. Otherwise, the people of the Nangong clan would find it hard to believe that their family head, who had always been calm and composed, would have such a huge emotional fluctuation. Senior Nangong, how have you been? Looking at the smiling Nangong family head, Ji Tianqing also cupped his fists and returned the greeting with a smile. After that, the 7 elders of the Nangong clan also lined up in a row. They were all emotional and had smiles on their faces as they saluted and greeted him. Kenshin, I haven't seen you in over 1,000 years, but you're even more impressive than before. Long Tian, you were once the #1 expert in the god realm, yet you met with such a tragic end. At that time it could be said that the world was shaken and millions of people cried for you. However, the heavens have eyes and have returned you to everyone to the god realm. Welcome back. Haha. Brother Kenshin, I haven't forgotten those 2 punches from back then. I still remember your teachings. When this world was shrouded in darkness, we like many people missed you. When everyone sank into darkness, numb and gave up on themselves, they saw light and hope, and that was you. The first few elders were still all right. They either saluted and greeted Ji Tianqing formally or tried to worm their way into being friends with him. The last elder to speak was the most emotional one. He was the youngest elder of the Nangong clan. He looked to be close to 40 years old and deliberately kept a beard to pretend to be mature. His name was Nangong Ao. This guy's name was Ao, but his words and actions were not cold and arrogant at all. Instead, they were a little jumpy. Sometimes funny, sometimes deep, sometimes emotional, sometimes childish, sometimes exaggerated. In any case, his mental state wasn't normal. After he finished speaking, he even revealed an expression of admiration and opened his arms to give Ji Tianqing a hug. That expression and posture was as if he was embracing the sun and welcoming the light. Ji Tianqing could not help but laugh. He pointed at him and shook his head. He laughed and said, "You little brat, I haven't seen you for more than 1,000 years and you're still so naughty. You're an elder now, you have to pay attention to your image." The elders nodded in agreement. One of them, an old man with a white beard, felt the same way. He quickly complained, "Long Tian, this little monkey is really a headache. We can't control him and he doesn't listen to the master's words. From what I see, when you stay in the Yenshu cave, let him accompany you. You have to educate him on our behalf. Don't cause trouble all day and disturb everyone's peace." The white-bearded elder's words made the master of the Nangong clan and the few elders laugh. Even the guards around the formation plate snickered. Nangong Ao did not feel ashamed or embarrassed at all. Instead, he looked at the crowd with sympathy. He sighed with a heavy face, "Sigh, you old-fashioned people are too boring. Staying in the Yanshu cave all day looking at the same people and not adding a new face for a few years, what's the point? Our clan only has tens of thousands of people and I'm familiar with everyone. I even know how many leg hairs these guards have. Don't you feel bored? When he said this, everyone had a strange expression. The dozens of guards all shuddered and subconsciously clamped their legs together, feeling an inexplicable chill. There were some guards who could not help but look at their legs. There were even some guards who started to recall and ponder. When did Nangong Ao see their leg hairs? Seeing that the atmosphere was a little strange and the topic was being led astray, the master of the Nangong clan coughed twice and pretended to be angry. He reprimanded, "Nangong Ao, don't think that I don't know what you're thinking. All these years, you purposely caused trouble and made mistakes. You just want me to punish you to let you leave the Yanshu cave and have fun outside." Not only did Nangong Ao not quibble, he quickly nodded and said flatteringly, "Master, you are indeed wise and wise. Since the patriarch is well aware of this, then I ask the patriarch to." Without waiting for him to finish, the master of the Nangong clan waved his hand playfully and said, "You wish. Now that Kenshin is here, you have to treat and accompany him well. Don't think about going anywhere." Nangong Ao showed a disappointed look. However, he changed his mind and had an idea. Hence, a smile returned to his face and he nodded. He said, "Yes, master. I will definitely complete the task." Looking at his expression, everyone present could guess that he must be planning something again. After a while, everyone finished their greetings. The master of the Nangong clan and a few elders escorted Ji Tianxing into the light door and entered the Yanshu cave. Before leaving, the master of the Nangong clan did not forget to order the guards to keep it a secret and not to leak any information. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. Chapter 4052. The Nangong family head was not foolish. Since Kenshin came alone without any fanfare, there must be something going on. Moreover, they had to keep a low profile to prevent the news from being leaked. After all, Kenshin was still a wanted man. Once the news was leaked out, he would be besieged by a large group of experts. By then, not only would Yanshu's grotto heaven be surrounded, Kenshin's life would also be in danger. Keeping it a secret was of utmost importance. After entering Yanshu's grotto heaven, the group flew across the sky, across the mountains and rivers, towards the depths of the grotto heaven. Yanshu's grotto heaven was huge, with a radius of 800,000 miles. This grotto heaven, which could accommodate billions of living beings, only had about 10,000 people living in it. Almost 10,000 of them were the disciples and relatives of the Nangong family. The other few thousand were the servants and relatives of the Nangong family. Yanshu's grotto heaven was rich in divine power and resources, forming a world of its own. As long as the realm of gods was not destroyed, this grotto heaven, which was attached to the realm of gods, could exist forever. Even if the Nangong family lived in seclusion for hundreds of millions of years, it would not be a problem. The palaces of the Nangong family were built on the peak of the mountains in the depths of the grotto heaven. That was where the divine power was the most abundant. Ji Tianxing and the others flew across the sky unhurriedly, chatting about some casual topics along the way. Looking at the surrounding mountains and rivers, it was a beautiful scenery filled with spiritual energy. The atmosphere was even more joyous. After about 45 minutes, the group flew across hundreds of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers and arrived at the palaces in the depths of the grotto heaven. Even though they were still a few hundred miles away, they could see a stretch of towering mountains connected together. Each mountain peak was arranged in a picturesque manner. Ji Tianxing had been here before and stayed for half a month. Of course, he knew that there were 49 mountains. On each mountain peak there were a few palaces and mansions. Altogether, there should be more than 200 palaces and more than 300 mansions. Looking from afar, the palaces and mansions were dazzling, exquisite, and dignified. There were teams of guards in bright armor guarding the entrance of each palace, as well as the left and right sides of each main road. Yanshu's grotto heaven had been sealed for many years and no outsiders had entered. However, the Nangong clan would not give up on basic precautions. Ji Tianxing had thought that after the Nangong clan had sealed themselves off from the world and lived in seclusion for hundreds of years, their clansmen must have become lazy and slack off. Even if he entered the palaces, most of the Nangong clan members would be cultivating in seclusion. However, he didn't expect that when the Nangong family head and elders escorted him to the plaza of the main peak, a large group of Nangong family members appeared around him. "Welcome back, Lord Kenshin." At least 300 people from the Nangong clan, all wearing luxurious clothes and exquisite accessories, surrounded the square. They were all in high spirits and their emotions were stirred up. Their faces were filled with joy as they looked at Ji Tianxing with sparkling eyes. The dozen or so young girls at the front of the crowd were holding many trays filled with divine fruits and wine cups filled with bejeweled nectar. The leader of the group was a young woman. She wore an aqua blue gauze dress. She had a noble and elegant temperament. Her expression and emotions seemed to be calmer, but her eyes were more complicated. Her eyes were as clear as a lake, and they contained an indescribable excitement and longing. She held a 5-colored haze cloak with embroidered dragon patterns in her hands. She looked at Ji Tianxing affectionately. It was obvious that when the Nangong family had brought the elders to the entrance of the cave to welcome Ji Tianxing, the news of Kenshin's return spread throughout the Xianxia cave. Those disciples who were cultivating in seclusion naturally didn't receive the news. They couldn't come out of seclusion in a short period of time. However, those disciples who weren't cultivating in seclusion, and were just cultivating normally, all moved out. The young disciples who admired and missed Kenshin even gathered at the main peak spontaneously and prepared this simple but passionate welcoming ceremony. As for the dozen or so young girls, the most elegant, dignified, noble and beautiful young woman was actually the one who was the most excited and the most surprised. It was just that she had great self-restraint and didn't lose her composure in front of everyone. Looking at the hundreds of Nangong family disciples who were cheering, Ji Tianxing felt a little emotional. He felt a tinge of warmth in his heart. Even if he had disappeared for more than 1,000 years, even if these young disciples didn't have a deep relationship with him. But after more than 1,000 years, these people could still remember him and treat him so warmly. He felt that he didn't waste his effort to help the Nangong family resolve the crisis. "Everyone, it's been 1,000 years. When we meet again, everyone is still in their prime. It's really delightful. Thank you for your warm welcome. Long Tian can't thank you enough." Ji Tianxing looked at the crowd with a face full of smiles. He clasped his fists and thanked them. The hundreds of young disciples became even more excited when they saw his reaction. They waved their hands and shouted. The Nangong family head and a few elders looked at this scene with a smile. They didn't stop them, nor did they rush them. Then the young woman in the aqua blue gauze dress held the colorful haze and embroidered dragon cloak. She walked gracefully in front of Ji Tianxing. She had a faint smile on her face. Her red lips parted slightly. Her voice was calm and gentle as she said, "Long Tian, welcome back to the Xianxia cave. This cloak was embroidered by me back then. It's just that I didn't have the chance to give it to you. Now that you've returned safe and sound, please accept it." Although she tried her best to maintain her composure and make her tone sound even calmer. But if one listened carefully, one would notice that her voice was trembling. This was naturally because she was too excited and surprised to see Long Tian again. Moreover, he was right in front of her. At this moment there was only one thought in her mind. To be able to see Long Tian again in this life, the 1,000 years of waiting and longing was worth it. This was also God's favor to her, giving her another chance. After saying these words, she held the gorgeous, exquisite and dreamlike cloak in both hands and handed it to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing looked at the beauty in front of him and was momentarily speechless. His heart was filled with mixed feelings and he didn't know what to say. Of course, he knew that this woman was the princess of the Nangong family, the apple of the Nangong family head's eye, Nangong Nihuang. He also knew how much Nangong Nihuang admired and even worshipped him back then. And Nangong Nihuang's feelings for him were well known to the Nangong family. Back then, when he rejected that seemingly logical marriage, he thought that he had broken Nangong Nihuang's heart and made Nangong Nihuang feel very embarrassed. More than 1,000 years had passed and Nangong Nihuang should have long forgotten about him. She shouldn't have any feelings for him to speak of. But he didn't expect that when they met again, Nangong Nihuang was no different from back then. Whether it was the way she looked at him or the way she spoke, it was exactly the same as back then. As for Nangong Nihuang's thoughts and feelings, he was afraid that they were still unwavering. Chapter 4053. Although Nangong Nihuang was a very outstanding woman and could be said to be one in a million. She was intelligent, kind, strong and independent, and had the strength of the fourth level of the Divine King realm. However, Ji Tianqing did not have any feelings for her and only saw her as a friend. Because of this, he had rejected the proposal of the Nangong family head back then. And now, Nangong Nihuang was giving away the cloak that she had spent many years refining and embroidering in front of everyone. Everyone was well aware of what this meant. Therefore, Ji Tianqing was a little hesitant. If he did not accept this gift, Nangong Nihuang would definitely be embarrassed in front of everyone and the Nangong family head would lose face. Even if no one would argue with Ji Tianqing, he did not want to hurt Nangong Nihuang like this. However, if he accepted this gift, he was worried that Nangong Nihuang and the others would misunderstand and cause more trouble and entanglement in the future. Just as Ji Tianqing was hesitating, Nangong Nihuang looked at him and secretly transmitted her voice. Long Tian, you have already rejected me once back then. Are you going to reject me again today? Don't think too much and don't have any psychological burden. This is just a small token of my appreciation. Welcome to Yanxu Cave Heaven again. After all, we are still friends, aren't we? Since Nangong Nihuang had said so, Ji Tianqing had no reason to reject her. He nodded to her and reached out to take the cloak. The hundreds of people around them were watching them. When Ji Tianqing hesitated, everyone was a little nervous and worried for Nangong Nihuang. When the crowd saw Ji Tianqing nodding and taking the cloak with a smile, everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief and then burst into a burst of surprised cheers. It seemed to them that this meant that Kenshin had accepted Nangong Nihuang's feelings. Nangong Nihuang's unwavering feelings and thousands of years of waiting had finally been reciprocated. Everyone was gratified and happy for her. After all, these hundreds of people were the disciples of the Nangong family. They knew best how lonely and sad Nangong Nihuang had been for more than 1,000 years. After Ji Tianqing received the cloak, he did not wear it immediately. Instead, he stored it in his spatial ring. Nangong Nihuang's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment and regret, but she didn't show any unusual expression and still had a smile on her pretty face. In fact, for the past 1,000 years, she had fantasized countless times that one day Kenshin would come back from the dead and return to Yanxu's cave to look for her. The next time she saw Kenshin, she would definitely put this cloak on Kenshin with her own hands. That was a cloak that she had painstakingly weaved with 100 years of effort and countless precious materials. She believed that only a great legendary genius like Kenshin was worthy of that cloak. When Kenshin put on that cloak, he would definitely be the most dazzling, most handsome man in the world. Unfortunately, her dream could not be realized for the time being. The crowd clamored in the square for a while. Then Nangong family head Nangong Nihuang and several elders escorted Ji Tianqing into the main hall. The main hall was called the Great Light Hall. It was where the top guests were received and where important military matters were discussed. After the Nangong family closed the cave, the Great Light Hall had not been used for more than 200 years. And today, in order to welcome Ji Tianqing's arrival, the Nangong family had opened the Great Light Hall. There were already guards and maids who had tidied up the hall, making it clean and spotless. The dazzling Great Hall of Light was brightly lit, giving off a magnificent and majestic appearance. The Nangong family head sat at the head of the table with Nangong Nihuang by his side. Ji Tianqing sat at the head of the table on the left with Nangong Ao sitting next to him. The other elders sat on the right. After everyone was seated, there were young maids who served all kinds of divine fruits, divine tea, pastries and wine. Both sides exchanged a few simple greetings before they got to the main topic. They talked about Ji Tianqing's intentions and plans. In order not to leak the secret, the Nangong family had dismissed all the guards and maids. He stared at Ji Tianqing with a calm expression and asked in a low voice, "Long Tian, why did you come to the Yanxu cave alone this time? Looking at your current aura and state, you are many times stronger than when you left the God world. You should have recovered to your peak state, right?" Nangong Nihuang and several elders stared at Ji Tianqing with expectant eyes. Everyone was guessing in their hearts that the sword god had most likely returned to his peak to take revenge. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and explained, "My strength has already recovered to the peak of the God King realm, and I have made a breakthrough compared to before. After returning to the God world, I plan to recuperate in the Yanxu cave for a few months. In the past few years, I have been traversing the void, searching for the major galaxies. To be honest, the major galaxies outside the God world are all under the control of the 5 God Emperors. The billions of creatures of different races in those star fields had all become the slaves of the 5 great God Emperors. They worked day and night for the 5 great God Emperors, collecting resources endlessly. Although I have not fought with the real bodies of the 5 God Emperors. When I passed by those galaxies, I killed the puppet masters set up by the 5 God Emperors, making it difficult for them to control those galaxies. In addition, there were a few avatars of the God Emperors who came to kill me, but I destroyed them all. Ji Tianxing roughly recounted what had happened in the past few years. When everyone heard this, they clicked their tongues in wonder. Their spirits were lifted and they were filled with excitement and anticipation. Especially the elders, who exclaimed and whispered in each other's ears. No wonder the 5 God Emperors have not shown themselves in the God world for the past 1,000 years. The ambition of the 5 God Emperors is huge, and they are plotting far ahead. Fortunately, Kenshin did not fall, or else who could defeat the 5 God Emperors? I'm afraid that in the end, all living things in this world will be enslaved by the 5 God Emperors. Long Tian's strength is stronger than before? Is he going to surpass the Divine King realm and become the 6th God Emperor? What's so strange about that? If those 5 guys can become God Emperors, why can't Kenshin? I still believe that if there is a 6th God Emperor in this world, it will be Kenshin. Since Long Tian can destroy the avatars of the 5 God Emperors, that means his strength is not far from the God Emperor realm. Patriarch Nangong and the elders were excited, focusing on the difference in strength between Ji Tianxing and the 5 God Emperors. Only Nangong Nihuang's expression changed slightly, looking at Ji Tianxing worriedly and asked, Long Tian, are you injured? Is it serious? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and smiled, Don't worry, it's just a minor injury. I just used too much energy and need some time to recuperate. When I returned to the God world, the first thing I did was to come to Yenshu Grotto Heaven. First, to recuperate, second, to use this place as a base to plan an earth-shattering plan. Just as you guessed, I want to fulfill my promise. When I return to the God world, I want to change the world. Chapter 40-54. Those sitting in the Great Hall of Light were all smart people. Even though Ji Tianxing did not say it clearly, he only mentioned the earth-shattering plan and the change of the day. Everyone immediately understood what he meant. They were all excited and their eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation. As for Nangong Nihuang, she was more attentive than the rest. After guessing Ji Tianxing's plan and purpose, she also noticed another detail. Ji Tianxing wanted to use the Yenshu cave as his base. Didn't this mean that he trusted the Nangong clan very much and had no doubts? Moreover, he would stay in the Yenshu cave for a long time and would not leave anytime soon. This was of course the best news for Nangong Nihuang. She looked around and saw that her father and a few elders had no objections. No one objected either. Therefore she said to Ji Tianxing, Ji Tianxing, thank you for trusting the Nangong clan. Don't worry, we will definitely support you and fully cooperate with you to carry out your plan. The Nangong clan master and a few elders reacted and quickly nodded in agreement. They all expressed their opinions. Long Tian, the Nangong clan will always be your ally and staunch supporter. We believe that you must be fully prepared for this decision. Since you trust the Nangong clan so much, how can we let you down? Long Tian, with your reputation as long as you raise your arm and call for help, there will definitely be a swarm of followers. As for the change of the day, we have to seriously consider it and discuss it carefully. You should first recuperate from your injuries. Overall, everyone still agreed and supported what Ji Tianxing wanted to do. Especially the Nangong clan master's attitude, which determined the choice of the entire Nangong clan. Seeing that no one objected or dissuaded him, Ji Tianxing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Previously he was still worried that the Nangong clan had been suppressed for thousands of years and had long been disheartened and did not dare to resist. Now it seemed that the Azura God Emperor's oppression of the Nangong clan for thousands of years did not make the Nangong clan yield. Instead, it aroused the Nangong clan's desire to resist. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Everyone chatted with Ji Tianxing for more than an hour, asking him about his experiences over the years and the truth behind his fake death. No one was in a hurry to ask about the future plans to rebel against the Azura God Emperor. 2 hours later, everyone finished chatting. At this time, Nangong family had once again warned everyone not to leak the news of Kenshin's return. Patriarch Nangong originally wanted to personally arrange Ji Tianqing's residence, but Nangong Nihuang and Nangong Ao volunteered to be responsible for arranging Ji Tianqing's residence and daily life. The Nangong family patriarch and the other elders were happy to see this happen. They also knew that among the young disciples of the Nangong clan, only Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang were closest to Ji Tianqing. Thus, everyone stood up and bowed. Ji Tianqing took Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang away from the Light Palace. After leaving the Light Palace, the three walked side by side on the square. There were nearly 1,000 Nangong clansmen gathered around. When they saw Ji Tianqing come out, they all surrounded him, greeted him and asked about his well-being to express their welcome. Seeing that everyone was so enthusiastic, if Ji Tianqing had to deal with them one by one, it would take him half a day. Nangong Ao and Nangong Nihuang hurriedly helped him out, and with a few words, they sent everyone away and made a path for him. The three quickly left and came to the back of the Light Palace. Nangong Nihuang originally wanted to arrange for Ji Tianqing to stay in the Star Origin Palace. This palace was magnificent enough and had always been used to entertain distinguished guests. Moreover, the Star Origin Palace was very close to the Light Palace, and not far from Nangong Nihuang's residence. There was only one palace in between. She even wanted to transfer the guards and maids in her palace to serve Ji Tianqing. But before Ji Tianqing could express his opinion, Nangong Ao waved his hand and vetoed this proposal. Nihuang, if it were any other distinguished guest, it would make sense for you to arrange for him to stay in the Star Origin Palace. But Long Tian is different. There are so many disciples of our Nangong clan who admire and worship him very much. Everyone can guess that he will most likely stay in the Star Origin Palace. At that time there will be people going to the Star Origin Palace to visit him every day. Wouldn't that be very noisy? He can't refuse, he can't hurt everyone's enthusiasm and face. But this will disturb his recuperation. Nangong Nihuang also felt that what he said was reasonable, so she nodded and said, I didn't consider it carefully. Ninth Elder, where should we arrange for Long Tian? Nangong Ao revealed a playful smile, lowered his voice and said, I live on the Flying Cloud Peak, which is far away from the Light Palace. Usually there are very few people who disturb me. Let Long Tian live on the Flying Cloud Peak. There happens to be an elegant and clean house there. I'll send someone to clean it up. As for the guards and maids, you can arrange for them. Nangong Nihuang thought that it made sense. The ninth elder was always causing trouble, and also liked to play tricks and bully the young disciples of the clan. Therefore, in the past few hundred years, very few people dared to go to the Flying Cloud Peak for fear of encountering Nangong Ao. In addition, Nangong Nihuang could also see that Nangong Ao's arrangement was somewhat selfish. He could be closer to Long Tian. But this was understandable. Nangong Nihuang didn't mind. As long as no one disturbed Ji Tianqing and allowed him to recuperate in peace, it was fine. The two reached a consensus and rushed to the Flying Cloud Peak with Ji Tianqing. After arriving at the Flying Cloud Peak, Nangong Ao ordered more than 20 guards and maids in his palace to clean up the house. Nangong Nihuang sent out a message, summoning the guards and maids who served her to gather at the Flying Cloud Peak. In less than an hour, this matter was done. Next, Ji Tianqing lived in the house, and the 12 guards and 8 maids were arranged to perform their duties. Nangong Nihuang saw that things were arranged properly and said to Ji Tianqing, Long Tian, rest for half a day. Tonight, Father will hold a grand banquet to welcome you. Our Xianxia cave has not held such a grand event for many years. You should prepare a little. This was what Ji Tianqing had expected and was not surprised. He nodded to show that he understood. Nangong Nihuang left, and only Ji Tianqing and Nangong Ao were left in the study. It was not until then that Nangong Ao winked at him and said, Long Tian, Nihuang has left. Now can you tell me the real purpose of coming to the Xianxia cave? Ji Tianqing was speechless. He glanced at him and said, My purpose just now in the Great Hall of Light, wasn't it very clear? Nangong Ao patted him on the shoulder with a don't pretend posture and said with a chuckle, Okay, between us brothers, you don't have to hide. Tell me, are you touched by Nihuang's deep friendship? Ever since the news of your death spread for more than 1,000 years, she has been depressed and sad. Her feelings for you are stronger than gold, higher than the sky and deeper than the sea. Everyone in our clan knows. Such an infatuated beauty, don't let her down. Chapter 40-55. Ji Tianxing found it difficult to withstand Nan Gong'ao's words and he was unable to answer. He could not find any words to refute and could only frown in silence. It was impossible to accept. If he said that he had no feelings for Nan Gongmi, it would be impossible to accept her feelings. It would make her feel awkward and hurt her heart and self-esteem. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was silent, Nan Gong'ao thought that he hadn't made up his mind yet, and was still hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. Therefore he advised him sincerely, "Brother, only through experiencing life and death can you see who truly cares about you and who truly loves you. I advise you to reconsider this matter. Don't hurt her a second time." Seeing that Nan Gong'ao's misunderstanding was getting deeper, Ji Tianxing could only explain, "Of course I don't want to hurt Ni Huang, but I really can't accept her feelings. Actually, I didn't come to Yanshu Grotto Heaven alone this time. I brought my family and friends. I already have a wife and children." Nan Gong'ao, who was about to turn and leave, suddenly turned to look at him with an expression as if he had seen a ghost. "When did you get married? You even have children?" All along, Nan Gong'ao's impression and understanding of Kenshin was that he was a cold block of ice, an unromantic block of wood. It was as if Kenshin was obsessed with sword cultivation and had no interest in relationships. Even if Kenshin did not marry, Nan Gong'ao would not be surprised. But he did not expect that after not seeing him for more than 1,000 years, Kenshin's character had changed. Not only did he get married, he even had children. Nan Gong'ao's eyes widened and his face was filled with disbelief. He stared straight at Ji Tianxing as if he wanted to see through him. Seeing that he did not believe him, Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Don't look at me like that, I'm telling the truth." Nan Gong'ao frowned and thought for a while. He said, "Words are not proof. When you let me see your wife and children, I will believe you." Ji Tianxing said, "They are in seclusion to cultivate and heal. You will see them in the future if you have the chance." Since that was the case, Nan Gong'ao had no choice but to accept this fact. He thought for a moment and was suddenly enlightened. He smiled and said, "In the past you were as cold as an iceberg. I thought you would never marry and use your sword as your companion. Since you've already broken your vows, you don't mind marrying another one. As long as you accept Ni Huang, even if she can't be your wife, I believe she will be willing to be your concubine." Breaking the precepts? Ji Tianxing could only frown at this word, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. However, he didn't take it to heart and explained, "I already have 2 wives and a pair of children. We've gone through a lot of hardships and tribulations before our family can be reunited in harmony. I won't take any more concubines. That would hurt them and be unfair to them." Nan Gong'ao didn't quite agree with his idea. He smiled bitterly and said, "Why are you as stubborn as Ni Huang?" Ji Tianxing only smiled and did not explain further. "If you want to be Ni Huang's lobbyist, then forget it. If there's nothing else, then I'll prepare to go into seclusion to recuperate." Don't. Nan Gong'ao quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm just asking a few questions. I'm not here to be Ni Huang's lobbyist. I have something important to ask you. Aren't you going to overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor and take over the boundless heaven continent? For such an earth-shattering event you must be well prepared. If we start after your seclusion, we'll have to waste a few months. Why don't you tell me now, what do you need me to do or prepare and plan in advance?" Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said with a smile, "It seems like you can't stay idle for even a day in Yanshu's cave. Asking me for a job is also to go out and have fun as soon as possible, right?" He. Nan Gong'ao grinned, which was considered a tacit admission. Ji Tianxing thought for a while and said, "I'll be in seclusion for about 3 months. During this time, help me investigate the details of those territorial masters in the boundless heaven continent. And those above the territorial masters, the divine king powerhouses left behind by the Azura God Emperor. You have to make a list, the more detailed the better." Nan Gong'ao's eyes suddenly lit up. He rubbed his hands excitedly and said, "A death list? This mission is very exciting, I like it. Don't worry, I'll do my best to make this list as soon as possible." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "All right, then do it as soon as possible." Nan Gong'ao thought for a while and asked again, I'm afraid it's impossible to overthrow the rule of the Azura God Emperor with just you and the power of our Nangong clan. There are still many ancient clans that are willing to listen and follow you. You have to contact them in advance, right? Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, Of course I have to do this, but not now, and I won't let you do it. Nangong Ao spread his hands and shrugged. All right, my reputation and status are indeed not qualified. All right, you can go into seclusion without worry. I'll go find the master now and ask him to let me go out to carry out the mission. Seeing him turn and leave excitedly, Ji Tianqing quickly reminded him, the powerhouses under the Azura God Emperor might have received some news. So, you have to be careful when carrying out the mission. Careful. Understood. Nangong Ao waved his hand and left the study room without looking back. Seeing his back disappear outside the garden, Ji Tianqing then retracted his gaze. After a while he entered the secret chamber hidden deep underground and prepared to cultivate in seclusion. Swoosh. After entering the secret chamber he took out the Jiutian Shu tower and entered the distorted space. The reason why he came to Yanshu Cave and decided to cultivate in seclusion for a few months was not to heal his injuries. In fact, his injuries were not serious. He had used up too much energy and was slowly recovering. It did not affect his combat power. The reason why he cultivated in seclusion for a few months was because the great battle on the Tiansu Star had benefited him greatly, and his realm had increased again. Now he was very close to becoming a peak divine king. He wanted to cultivate in seclusion for a period of time before the shocking plan started. He wanted to break through to the peak divine king realm. Under the bloody flame sacred tree, Ji Tianqing scanned the surroundings with his divine consciousness and checked on everyone's condition. It was quiet under the tree. Everyone was sitting on the platform focused on healing their injuries and cultivating in seclusion. Ji Tianqing raised his head and looked at the humongous bloody flame sacred tree. His eyes flashed with admiration and relief. In the battle on the Tiansu Star, hundreds of divine king powerhouses and countless Sir God powerhouses were killed. Naturally, the blood essence of those powerhouses were devoured by the bloody flame sacred tree. That battle was the one in which the bloody flame sacred tree had devoured the most energy in its history. Many years ago, it had already grown into an upper king sacred tree. And the battle on the Tiansu Star had allowed it to break through again. It was in the process of becoming a supreme king sacred tree. Now the entire crown of the bloody flame sacred tree was surging with bloody flame and purple flame. Ji Tianqing believed that in a few years, it would become a supreme king sacred tree. At that time, this divine tree would become the 5th supreme grade divine item he possessed. Chapter 4056. Even the Shuiyan sacred tree was evolving and becoming stronger. How could Ji Tianqing stop his footsteps? Soon he collected his thoughts and began to cultivate. Next he planned to use 10 years to refine the 400 pieces of divine personas of the foreign tribes' divine kings. Even though the foreign tribes' divine kings were relatively weak, with only a few of them being upper divine kings and most of them being middle divine kings. But they had the advantage in numbers. Ji Tianqing believed that these 400 pieces of divine personas would be a great help to him in breaking through to the peak divine king realm. Swoosh. He held the 2 pieces of divine personas in both hands and used the engulfing divine power to refine them. It was quiet under the sacred tree. Only rays of divine light shone silently. As time passed, the power of the 2 pieces of divine personas turned into 5 colored streams and entered Ji Tianqing's body continuously. His power was slowly and weakly increasing, but his foundation was still very solid. Ji Tianqing was cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime and was not affected or disturbed at all. In the next few days, the Yanshu Grotto heaven was in a state of excitement and excitement. More and more disciples of the Nangong clan knew that Kenshin had returned and was recuperating in the Yanshu Grotto heaven. It was even to the extent that those young disciples who had seen Ji Tianqing with their own eyes were filled with pride and complacency. The sword god they saw was extremely handsome, mighty and elegant. This caused those Nangong clan members who did not see Ji Tianqing to gather in groups of 3 to 5 and rush to the main peak. They gathered outside the Xingyuan palace and looked in anticipation, hoping to see the legendary Kenshin. Some of the women and older Nangong clan members could still suppress their excitement and waited outside the palace. However, some of the young disciples who were excited and hot-blooded did not have the patience to wait. When someone took the lead to break into the Xingyuan palace, more people followed suit and followed. Therefore, more than 2,000 Nangong clan members entered the Xingyuan palace and expressed their desire to visit Kenshin. Their main purpose was to witness Kenshin's glory with their own eyes. There were only a little more than 20 guards stationed in the Star Origin Palace. How could they stop more than 2,000 clansmen? Not to mention the 2,000-plus people were all hot-blooded and emotional. They didn't listen to their advice at all. Even if they repeatedly stated that Kenshin was not in the Star Origin Palace, no one believed them. More than 2,000 people clamored and surrounded the Star Origin Palace. The scene was a little awkward and out of control. At the critical moment, Nangong Nihuang and several elders rushed over with many deacons. "What are you doing? Spread out." So many people have broken into the Star Origin Palace and are all crowded together. What kind of scandal is this? You lawless bastards, do you still have the family rules and ancestral teachings in your eyes? A few elders scolded sternly, ordering the deacons to disperse the 2,000 clansmen. Due to the majesty of the several elders, many Nangong clan members were filled with fear and hurriedly withdrew from the Star Origin Palace. But without permission, they could only gather in the square outside the Divine Palace and didn't dare to disperse. At this time, Nangong Nihuang stepped into the sky and looked at the crowd with a cold expression. She said in a solemn tone, "My fellow clansmen, I understand your eagerness to see Kenshin, but I am very disappointed by your recklessness and impulsiveness. Fortunately, Kenshin doesn't live in the Star Origin Palace and only we saw this farce. Think about it, if Kenshin really lived here he would be in seclusion. He is currently recuperating in seclusion, yet you barged into the Divine Palace so rudely and recklessly. How rude is that? Is this how you treat our clan's distinguished guest and benefactor, your idol and role model? What do you want to show Kenshin? Show the impulsiveness and sloppiness of our clansmen? Or the ignorance and rudeness of our clansmen?" Nangong Nihuang's voice wasn't loud and there was no anger on her face. She didn't curse. However, her words clearly entered everyone's ears, causing them to feel ashamed, regretful, and self-reproachful. Seeing the crowd's expression and reaction, Nangong Nihuang continued, "Today's matter ends here. I will plead for leniency on your behalf and ask the elders to exempt you from punishment. But I hope you will remember this lesson and think carefully before you do anything next time. If you can't even do such a small thing well, how can you make Kenshin believe that our Nangong clan can take on big responsibilities?" After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and signaled for the crowd to disperse. The more than 2,000 Nangong clan members turned and left as if they had been pardoned. In a short while the square returned to peace and quiet. When the clansmen left the main peak and were on their way back to their residences, some of the smarter ones reacted and realized a problem. "Eldest mistress just said that we have to make Kenshin believe that our clan can take on big responsibilities? What does this mean? What kind of responsibilities? Could it be that Kenshin didn't come to Yenshu Cave to marry eldest mistress, but to carry out some mission? Take on big responsibilities? What kind of mission can be considered a big responsibility? Could it be that Kenshin wants to lead our clan to fight against the Azura God Emperor and seize control of the boundless heaven continent? It's very possible. Kenshin has a blood feud with the 5 God Emperors. If that's the case, then it's too shocking and exciting." Those meticulous and quick-witted Nangong clan members quickly guessed Nangong Nihuang's meaning. As the crowd conversed, the news quickly spread. In less than a day the entire Yenshu Cave knew about this. Suddenly, the Nangong clan fell into a state of excitement again. Everyone was discussing this matter. Of course, 60 to 70% of the Nangong clan members were looking forward to this event. But there were still 30 to 40% of the clansmen who were worried and anxious. In their opinion, even if Kenshin returned to his peak and recovered his strength, he would not be a match for the Azura God Emperor, let alone the 5 God Emperors. That would be seeking his own death. If the Nangong clan followed Kenshin and started this war, the Nangong clan would definitely be annihilated and destroyed. As a result, 2 completely different attitudes spread throughout Yenshu's cave. Even a few days later, many of the Nangong clan members were still arguing over this matter, and there were many differences. Not only the ordinary clansmen, but even some of the deacons and a few elders were affected and had changed their minds. The elders, Nangong Nihuang and the head of the Nangong clan all saw the changes in the wind and public opinion, but they did not express their opinions. This was because the head of the Nangong clan had instructed Nangong Nihuang to reveal the clues in public and let the clansmen guess Kenshin's plan. The head of the Nangong clan knew that sooner or later, the clansmen would know about this news. More than 10,000 clansmen had to reach a consensus before they could obey orders and unite to support Kenshin. And it was not that easy to unite as one. They needed a certain amount of time to digest and accept this news. Chapter 4057. More than 10,000 Nangong clan members were still debating. However, the Nangong clan master and a few elders did not express their opinions. Even Nangong Nihuang did not express her opinion in public. Looking at everyone's posture, it was as if the clan members were allowed to discuss this matter. However, as time passed, the impact of this news on the Nangong clan members became weaker and weaker. After discussing the same topic too many times, everyone would eventually feel tired and indifferent. Those who firmly supported Kenshin and believed that the Nangong clan would follow Kenshin to overthrow the Azura God Emperor's rule no longer waved their flags and shouted their battle cries with passion. Those who were full of worries and worried about the fate of the Nangong clan and thought that Kenshin was digging his own grave also gradually lost interest in arguing. They were even too lazy to persuade other clan members to give up supporting Kenshin. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The impact of this matter had completely faded, and no one in Yenshu's grotto heaven was discussing it anymore, let alone arguing about it. After all, everyone's opinions were not that important. In the end, it was still up to the clan master to decide. At this time, some rumors began to spread among the Nangong clan members. According to some deacons, Nangong Nihuang's good sister secretly revealed that Nangong Nihuang was very confident in Kenshin. No matter what Kenshin did, she would fully support him. In less than 2 days, a few deacons spread the news again. They heard from 2 elders that a few elders had a high opinion of Kenshin and were full of anticipation. The Nangong clan was once all-powerful and stood at the peak of the vast heaven mainland. How nostalgic and proud it was. After the Azura God Emperor ruled the vast heaven mainland, the Nangong clan's status plummeted to its current state. They were full of resentment and hatred and had endured for thousands of years. Now they finally had a chance to take revenge and destroy the Azura God Emperor's rule. Even if they had to risk their lives, they would fight with all their might. Originally, the topic of Kenshin's revenge had already died down. After these few rumors spread, it immediately stirred up the topic again, causing countless clan members to discuss it. This time, the voices opposing the Nangong clan's support for the Sword God had decreased by more than half, becoming sporadic. Unknowingly, many people of the Nangong clan were influenced by the words of Nangong Nihuang and the elders, affecting their mentality and decisions. The Nangong clan members who supported the Kenshin became even more determined. Those who were hesitant and wanted to sit on the fence also began to support the Kenshin. As for those clansmen who opposed the decision, they began to hesitate or obey the decision of the patriarch. In short, no matter what the patriarch decided on this matter, the Nangong clan would be very peaceful internally, and there would definitely not be any division or conflict. On the other hand, Nangong Ao and 8th Elder brought 100 elite Divine Lord experts and already started taking action in the Boundless Heaven continent. Back then, Nangong Ao had gone to the Patriarch and told him that he had been entrusted by Kenshin to go out on a mission. Of course, the Patriarch of the Nangong family nodded in agreement, but he felt that Nangong Ao was not reliable, so he had to send another elder to accompany him. Furthermore, Nangong Ao's mission was very important, and he could not afford to make any mistakes or oversights. Therefore, the Patriarch of the Nangong family not only sent 8th Elder, but also sent nearly 100 Divine Lords. He even handed over the intelligence network that the Nangong clan had laid dormant for many years to Nangong Ao. With the intelligence network that was good at gathering information, Nangong Ao and 8th Elder were even more relaxed and could achieve twice the result with half the effort. In just a month's time, they had already investigated 20 domains and gathered information on 20 domain lords. However, at this speed, it would be very difficult to gather information on nearly 100 domain lords in 3 months. In order to speed up the progress, Nangong Ao decisively chose to split up. He and Eighth Elder each brought 50 elite divine lords and rushed to the north and south of the continent respectively to gather information. When the patriarch of the Nangong family heard this news, he was naturally worried about the safety of the two elders. However, he also knew that time was tight, and if he did not do this he would not be able to complete the mission given by Kenshin. Therefore he could only acquiesce. In the next 2 months, some undercurrents gradually appeared in the boundless heaven continent. There were many clues and rumors that spread across the continent. It seemed like the news of Kenshin's return was inadvertently leaked out by someone. The various ancient clans and many forces of Grotto Heavens and Blessed Lands were no longer quietly lying dormant and showed some signs of restlessness. Several trusted generals under the Azura God Emperor's command, the few controllers who guarded the boundless heaven continent, seemed to have also received some confidential information. No idea what orders they issued. Nearly 100 regions on the continent had powerhouses walking and mobilizing troops. Even though these things happened in secret and were carried out in a confidential state. But the boundless heaven continent that had been peaceful for many years, suddenly having these movements appear in a very concentrated manner still attracted the attention of people with intentions. The various major factions, sects as well as many ancient clans, all became restless. Even the countless factions and divine king powerhouses all had their own thoughts. However, they had a premonition that a shocking storm was coming, and they might have the qualifications to get a share of the loot. Therefore, smart people would make arrangements and plans in advance to be in an active state. And not belatedly when the situation changed, accepting certain results in a passive state. Ji Tianxing's 3-month deadline, the Nangong family head and several elders all knew about it. They were all waiting patiently and quietly carrying out some preparatory work in secret. But the boundless heaven continent was surging like a storm. The various factions could not hold back and started to take action in advance. Only 2.5 months had passed, and Xianxia Grotto Heaven welcomed a group of mysterious guests. The newcomers were 5 divine king powerhouses who hid their faces and concealed their tracks. They did not come together, but divided into 3 groups over 2 days to visit the Nangong family head one after another. When they arrived at the entrance of Xianxia Grotto Heaven, they did not reveal their true faces nor did they report their identities. They only took out a token each and let the guard commander pass it to the Nangong family head. When the Nangong family head saw those tokens, he guessed the identities of the 5 powerhouses. He could only let the guard commander pass and allow them to enter Xianxia Grotto Heaven. 2 days later, the 5 mysterious powerhouses gathered in the Great Light Hall and were received by the Nangong family head at the same time. There were only these 6 people in the hall. They were all upper divine kings and were the rulers of a region. Both parties did not talk nonsense and exchange conventional greetings. The atmosphere in the hall was also very solemn and oppressive. The few mysterious powerhouses' words were exceptionally short and surprisingly consistent. Nangong Buhua, we want to see him. The Nangong family head was not surprised by the few powerhouses' request. He even expected it. He shook his head expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "You came uninvited, I can't fulfill your request. The time is not ripe yet, please return first. Not long later I will gather everyone on his behalf." One of the black-robed powerhouses with a hoarse voice snorted coldly and said, "Nangong Buhua, don't play dumb in front of me. Our coming today and coming the next time are 2 completely different matters." Chapter 40-58. Of the 6 experts in the hall, which one of them was not a sly old fox? Even if the black-robed elder did not say this, Master Nangong had already guessed their intentions. The 5 of them masked their faces and secretly met with Ji Tianxing. Most likely they wanted to negotiate with Ji Tianxing to obtain more favorable conditions and benefits. It would be another matter if they followed Ji Tianxing's summons in the future. At least they would be in a passive position. Their status would be lower and they would have fewer bargaining chips. To put it simply, the forces represented by these 5 experts had the intention to support Ji Tianxing and help Ji Tianxing overthrow the Azura God Emperor's rule. However, their forces worked for Ji Tianxing and risked their lives. They must obtain sufficient benefits. Otherwise, who would be willing to risk being destroyed and follow him in his heaven-defying actions? Master Nangong could understand the feelings of these sly old foxes, but he could not make his own decision and negotiate with them on behalf of Ji Tianxing. There was no other way. Ji Tianqing was still recuperating in seclusion. He could not disturb him and he could not let the 5 sly old foxes know. If the 5 of them knew that Ji Tianqing was injured and was still recuperating in seclusion, when they negotiated, Ji Tianqing would be in a more passive position and it would be very disadvantageous. Therefore, the Nangong family had decided that he had to brush these 5 fellows off and send them away as soon as possible. What do you want to do? Why did you sneak into Yanshu's cave? I don't know and I don't want to know. I just want to tell you that the time is not right. Don't try to be clever and make a fool of yourself. Moreover, Kenshin is the only hope for us and the boundless heaven continent. If you have any ill intentions, it's better to dispel them as soon as possible. We have known each other for so many years. I can only remind you once. Please take care of yourselves. After he finished, Master Nangong waved his hand, indicating that he wanted to send the guests off. However, the 5 mysterious experts sat there motionlessly. They had no intention of leaving. The black-robed elder sneered again, Nangong Buhua. We're all shameless people and we can't do something as despicable as you to sell your daughter for glory. However, reality has proven that you've won and gained Kenshin's trust. Otherwise, he would not have chosen Yanshu Grotto Heaven and let you represent him. But don't forget, your Nangong clan has already boarded the ship and there is no turning back. But we are different. If we join forces and refuse to cooperate, it will become a one-man show between the Kenshin and the Nangong clan. One could imagine what would happen to the Nangong clan when the time came. Therefore, you'd better help us build a bridge and facilitate this cooperation. Not only is this beneficial to us, but it is also to protect the legacy of the Nangong clan. Patriarch Nangong frowned and instinctively wanted to refute the black-robed elder. However, he immediately calmed down. He knew that the other party was deliberately provoking him. Thus, he did not make any excuses and said expressionlessly, "Half a month later, I will follow the Kenshin's wishes and invite all of you to participate in this grand event. So, everyone please go back and prepare. Forgive me for not entertaining you." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand and shot out a golden light. Swoosh! The door of the great light hall opened and sunlight shone in from outside. The 5 mysterious experts looked at each other, feeling angry and depressed. However, they could not do anything about Nangong Buhua's stubborn attitude. The 5 experts glared at Nangong Buhua and got up to leave. After a long while, the 5 mysterious experts left. At this moment, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders stepped into the great light hall. Nangong Nihuang's face was as cold as ice. She asked calmly, "Father, are the 5 clan leaders here to negotiate with the Kenshin?" Nangong Buhua nodded slightly and did not explain further. The elders revealed a playful smile, anger and disdain as they started to discuss. These old foxes are well informed, but they are too impatient. Don't be fooled by their usual cold and arrogant appearance, as if they are living in seclusion and do not care about worldly affairs. In fact, who doesn't want to restore their former glory and have a high status and power? They think that by negotiating in advance they can get more benefits? They are too naive. Kenshin is an expert, but he is not a schemer. I think they are just jealous that the Nangong clan is trusted and valued by the Kenshin. That is why they are so anxious to jump out. The middle-aged elders were all somewhat proud of themselves, and were quite critical of the 5 forces. Only a white-haired elder reported with a calm expression, "Patriarch, after 2 months of buffer, the opposition of the clansmen has weakened. Now more than 80% of the clansmen have no objections. When the Kenshin comes out and announces the start of the operation, there should be no more objections." Nangong Buhua nodded and said calmly, "It's within my expectations. It's only right." The old man lowered his voice and asked, "Patriarch, those old foxes aren't wrong. The Kenshin chose Yanshu Cave as their base because they trust the Nangong clan. However, this also means that the Nangong clan is the Kenshin's staunchest ally. There is no way out. To be honest, no one can guarantee that the Kenshin will succeed. In fact, I think there is only a 10% chance. Have you really thought it through and made your choice?" Hearing this, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders stared at Nangong Buhua. There were no outsiders here. Everyone present was the person in charge of the Nangong clan. Their choice would determine the fate of the Nangong clan. Nangong Buhua smiled and said calmly, "I do not want to betray the Kenshin's trust, so I can only choose to accept it. When dealing with matters, the most taboo thing is to be indecisive. That is the path to death. Since I have chosen to board the Kenshin's ship, I have to go all the way. Even if the odds are low, I will take it as a gamble. I have to have the courage to take it. After a pause, he said solemnly, most importantly, the Kenshin has already created a miracle. Why can't we trust him? Hearing this, Nangong Nihuang and the other elders heaved a sigh of relief. Their expressions and eyes became firm. Previously, they were worried that the clan leader would hesitate and not be able to make up his mind. Since the clan leader had already made his decision and was firm, they did not say anything more. They just had to follow the plan and do what they thought was right. Clan leader, we understand. Rest assured, clan leader. We will do our best even if we have to sacrifice our lives. The Nangong clan has been dormant for 1,000 years, conserving our strength, just for today's battle. The elders expressed their opinions one after another. Their voices revealed their excitement and tenacity. Nangong Buhua nodded with satisfaction and said, Long Tian will be out in half a month. You cannot slack off on what I have instructed you to do. You must complete it quickly. Since the news has been leaked, we must be prepared at all times just in case. Chapter 40-59. There was a saying that a prophecy came true. It was very suitable to be used on Nangong Buhua. He had just reminded the elders to strengthen their defenses and put Yanshu's grotto on alert. In less than 2 days, Yanshu's grotto welcomed another group of uninvited guests. Previously, the 5 mysterious experts would take out their tokens and let the guard commander at the entrance of the grotto report to them. This group of uninvited guests was more than 1,000 people. They rushed to the entrance of the grotto with a murderous aura. Swoosh! 3 upper king-grade divine warships lined up in the sky. Hundreds of cannons poked out and aimed at the formation at the entrance of the grotto. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh! 50 divine king powerhouses led 900 divine lord realm experts as they flew out of the divine battleships. They lined up in the sky and surrounded the entrance of the grotto. They were all wearing armor and holding swords. Their bodies were surging with murderous aura. Although the number of guards at the entrance of Yanshu's grotto had doubled. Currently, there were 200 guards and 4 divine king realm guards leading them. However, they did not expect that before Kenshin's plan could even begin, there would be an army attacking Yanshu's grotto. Everyone was caught off guard. They were panicking and worried. Immediately, they pulled out their swords and sabers and gathered together. They stared at the surrounding people vigilantly. Even though the 4 guard commanders were afraid, they could not show their fear. They braced themselves and went forward to question the identity and purpose of the group. Who are you? Don't you know that this is Yanshu's grotto? This is the territory of the Nangong clan. Are you trying to start a war with the Nangong clan by pointing your weapons at us? If you don't want blood to flow like a river and the people to suffer, I advise you to leave immediately. Although the tone of the few guard commanders was strict, their aura was powerful. However, to the group it sounded like they were trying to put up a strong front. After all, they were well aware of the origin of the other party. At this moment, among the 50 divine kings who stood at the front of the group, a few experts with powerful aura walked out. The leader was more than 10 feet tall. He wore a gold and silver chainmail, a phoenix-winged golden helmet and an ice-blue cloak. This person had a dignified appearance and an extremely powerful aura. Clearly, he was the leader of these 1,000 experts. A sword hung from his waist. His left hand was behind his back and his right hand was on the hilt of the sword. He looked at the several guard commanders with an expressionless face. I, Jin Shuang, have received orders to capture the criminal. No one is allowed to disobey, otherwise I will be punished for treason. Quickly report this to Nangong Buhua. Open up Yanshu's cave and welcome me inside. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Even though the Nangong clan's guards were able to guess the origin of those people, they were unable to do so. But when they heard the 2 words Jin Shuang, they couldn't help but tremble and a trace of fear flashed in their eyes. It couldn't be helped. Jin Shuang was the vice commander of the patrol envoy. She had the authority and responsibility to patrol the entire boundless heaven continent. Since Vice Commander Jin Shuang had personally come, there was no need to mention the 7 high-level god kings standing behind him, all wearing silver armor. Those 7 god kings were definitely all patrolling envoys. After all, everyone knew that there were 49 patrolling envoys under the Shura God Emperor. Every team of 7 patrolled the world in rotation, maintaining order and peace. Other than that, the remaining 42 God Kings were mostly the leaders of the various regions and the leaders of the various forces. In short, those who came were all strong enemies that could not be underestimated. The 4 captains of the Nangong clan made a decision after exchanging glances with each other. One of them secretly sent out a message to report the situation to Nangong Buhua. The other 3 guard commanders acted dumb and pestered Jin Shuang to stall for time. So it is Vice Commander Jin Shuang who has graced us with your presence. Please forgive us for not going out to meet you. Vice Commander Jin Shuang, our Nangong clan had already closed Yanxu's cave more than 200 years ago and no longer cared about worldly affairs. You said that you want to capture the criminal. This has nothing to do with our Nangong clan, right? Vice Commander Jin Shuang, there must be some misunderstanding. Please calm down. Our clan leader will definitely explain to you clearly. Kenshin was a criminal and the Shura God Emperor wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. This was something that everyone knew. Therefore, the Nangong clan would never admit that they were harboring the criminal and shielding Kenshin. How could Jin Shuang believe the 3 guards' words? He scoffed at this and sneered contemptuously, "None of you are qualified to speak to this king. Shut up." Such arrogance and disdain made the 4 guard commanders feel ashamed and angry. They were so angry that they gritted their teeth. However, they could not do anything and could only suppress their anger and stare at Jin Shuang angrily. Jin Shuang ignored them and patiently waited for Nangong Buhua to appear. In fact, he had already found out that Kenshin was in Yanxu's cave. That was why he gathered so many elite soldiers and rushed to Yanxu's cave. He was also prepared. Whether Nangong Buhua appeared or not, and whether Kenshin was still in Yanxu's cave, he would force his way in. At that time he would give the Nangong clan a painful lesson to warn the rest of the ancient clans. As for Kenshin, it would be best if he could capture him. Even if he could not, it would not matter. Anyway, he was only here to test the reaction of Kenshin and the Nangong clan. The main force to deal with Kenshin was still gathering and deploying in secret. Unknowingly, 15 minutes had passed. Nangong Buhua had not appeared and Jin Shuang was getting impatient. He frowned and his aura became gloomier. The few patrol envoys behind him started to fan the flames and make sarcastic remarks. "Deputy Commander, you have been waiting here for so long. How could Nangong Buhua not show up? He is not giving you any face." "Humph! How dare he make our commander Jin Shuang wait here for so long? That Nangong Buhua is too arrogant. Nangong Buhua is avoiding us. He is obviously guilty. Since Nangong Buhua is harboring the criminal, he should be punished as an accomplice. Deputy Commander, I am afraid that Nangong Buhua is packing up his belongings and preparing to escape. We cannot wait any longer. We must rush into Yanxu's grotto heaven and capture the criminal and Nangong Buhua." The few patrol envoys were egging Jin Shuang on to lead the group into Yanxu's grotto heaven. When the 900 overseer gods heard this, their blood boiled and they were eager to give it a try. As for the Nangong clan's guards, they were filled with anger and complained in their hearts. If Jin Shuang really led the group into Yanxu's grotto heaven, they would be sacrificed first. However, the tone and expression of the patrol envoys were very sincere. Sounded like they were threatening them. However, with Jin Shuang's ruthless nature, it was very likely that he would do so. This caused the guards' hearts to be in a mess and they felt extremely conflicted. They could not do anything. They could only hold their weapons tightly and prepare to fight to the death. Soon another 15 minutes had passed. Jin Shuang's patience was finally exhausted. He waved his hand murderously and gave the order to attack. 7 inspectors, 42 godly kings, and 900 godly lord experts were all ready to launch an attack. Chapter 40-60. Not only were the deity kings and sir gods ready to attack. Even the 3 deity warships in the sky had activated their formation. Their cannons were shining with divine light. In the next moment, the few hundred cannons were about to shoot out light pillars towards the entrance of Yanxu's cave. Without a doubt, there was no need for the deity kings and the 900 sir gods to attack. Just the divine light cannons from the 3 deity warships were enough to kill the 200 Nangong clan guards. The divine light that covered the sky and the divine skill that could destroy the world was about to explode. The 200 Nangong clan guards and the 4 guard commanders were so frightened that they did not know what to do. Their palms were sweating as they held onto their weapons. However, at this critical moment, the formation at the entrance of the cave was activated. The teleportation door shone with a dazzling white light. Jin Shuang, you are brazenly leading your troops to besiege Yanxu's cave. You have no respect for me at all. Following the loud and majestic voice, a burly figure passed through the light door and appeared in the sky. It was a middle-aged man from the deity clan. He wore a blue brocade robe and a luxurious divine crown. He exuded a majestic aura. He was the master of the Nangong clan, Nangong Buhua. Following that, a few more figures flew out from the light door and followed him to the scene. These middle-aged and elderly deity clan were the elders of the Nangong clan. Seeing that the patriarch and the elders had arrived, the 200 guards heaved a sigh of relief, and their hanging hearts settled back into their stomachs. Jin Shuang and the rest of the deity kings looked at Nangong Buhua. They sized him up coldly and vigilantly. Nangong Buhua stood in the sky and confronted Jin Shuang. His aura was not weak at all. Jin Shuang, you are the deputy commander of the patrol under the God Emperor. Everyone respects the God Emperor, so they give you some face. I did not expect you to be so arrogant and unscrupulous. The Nangong clan has been living in seclusion for hundreds of years and we have not done anything wrong. What right do you have to bring so many soldiers to Yanxu's cave? Do you think that the Nangong clan has been quiet for too long and you want to use the Nangong clan to establish your authority? Or do you think that the Nangong clan is easy to bully? Before the Azura God Emperor ruled the vast heaven continent, the Nangong clan was the most powerful force on this continent. Nangong Buhua's majesty and his aura were no weaker than the peak deity kings. If the Jin Shuang Nangong Buhua, they were peak deity kings. But the one who came was Jin Shuang, the weakest of the rulers. How could Nangong Buhua take him seriously? Nangong Buhua clan guards to Nangong Wang Buhua Nangong. Nangong Buhua, how can you talk to the deputy commander like that? Old man Nangong, watch your words. God King. Deputy Commander Nangong Buhua used to bow and scrape, but he's become so arrogant today. He's acting recklessly. In this subordinate's opinion, he must have been harboring the criminal and thought that he had the criminal's support. That's why he dared to be so bold. That's right. Nangong Buhua has a rebellious heart. That's why he dares to offend the Lord. The inspectors echoed each other and accused Nangong Buhua of a crime. Jin Shuang sneered in his heart but pretended to be angry. He stared at Nangong Buhua and shouted, Nangong Buhua, I don't want to waste time with you. Let's be frank. You only have 2 choices. Hand over Kenshin and I'll pardon the Nangong clan. Or you step aside and I'll bring my men into Yanxu's cave and find Kenshin. Nangong Buhua was prepared for this. He pretended to be stunned and said in surprise, Sword God? Jin Shuang, what nonsense are you talking about? Are you confused? Kenshin is a legendary expert from 1,000 years ago. Wasn't he killed by the 5 God Emperor? Could it be that those who had already fallen could still come back to life? Jin Shuang. Although I've offended you, you can't use such a ridiculous reason to take revenge on the Nangong clan. If you insist on hurting the Nangong clan, don't blame me for fighting back and defending the dignity of the Nangong clan with my life. Nangong Buhua said righteously. He even took out a divine sword and held it in his hand. He looked at Jin Shuang with murderous intent. Anyone who saw this scene would be convinced by his acting skills and would think that he had been wronged. However, Jin Shuang and the rest did not believe him. They all sneered. Nangong Buhua, stop pretending. Jin Shuang did not want to waste time with Nangong Buhua. He felt that Nangong Buhua must be up to something. Therefore he gave an ultimatum. I'll give you one last chance. Either you hand over Kenshin and I'll forgive your crime. Or I'll capture Kenshin personally. The Nangong clan will be buried with him. After saying this, Jin Shuang pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at Nangong Buhua. He was emitting a murderous intent. 42 godly kings and 900 godly monarchs had also accumulated their strength to the peak and were ready to attack. As everyone mobilized their divine power, their aura rose. An invisible force field appeared and a violent hurricane blew. Everyone from the Nangong clan had their hearts in their mouths as they secretly wiped their sweat. No matter what, the Nangong clan was in a passive position. They were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. In the next moment, as long as Jin Shuang and the rest attacked, the Nangong clan would suffer heavy casualties. This battle was unavoidable. It was useless even if Nangong Buhua acted dumb. Since that was the case, he could only grit his teeth and make a decision. He sent a message to the 4 guard commanders and ordered, "What are you waiting for? Retreat to Yanshu's cave immediately. I'll cover you." The 4 guard commanders and 200 guards knew that Nangong Buhua was going to give up the formation plate and retreat to the cave to defend. Therefore, everyone turned around without hesitation. Like an arrow leaving the bow, they rushed towards the blazing white light door. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the blink of an eye, dozens of guards passed through the light door and escaped into Yanshu's cave. The 4 guard commanders were aware that they were not in a hurry to escape. Instead, they held their divine weapons tightly and helped the guards to cover the rear. Nangong Buhua and a few elders were the same. They formed a line of defense and blocked the guards behind. Although the guards were of lower status and could not be compared to the guard commanders and elders, they were still descendants of the Nangong clan. However, they were also descendants of the Nangong clan. Nangong Buhua naturally had to protect them. Seeing the guards escaping, Jin Shuang knew that Nangong Buhua was determined to resist. He did not waste any more time and gave the order to attack. Kill. Following his command, the 42 divine kings and 900 surgods released their divine power with all their might. They used their earth-shattering skills and charged towards the entrance of Yanshu's cave. The 3 divine warships also opened fire and shot out hundreds of divine power light pillars. Chapter 4061. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the earth-shattering noises, thousands of divine light blades and overwhelming wind, fire, and lightning rained down on the entrance of the grotto heaven. Hundreds of divine light pillars shot out by the 3 divine warships also hit the formation plate at the entrance. The first to bear the brunt of the attack was not the 100 guards who could not escape in time. Instead, it was Nangong Buhua, a few elders and 4 commanders of the guards who were blocking the way. Even though everyone had already taken out various divine weapons and life-saving divine weapons and used all their defensive techniques to form a huge 5-colored light shield. However, a round of attacks from more than 900 experts and powerhouses shattered the 5-colored light barrier on the spot. Then more than 500 divine light pillars drowned Nangong Buhua and the others. Boom, 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 boom. A series of loud booms reverberated between heaven and earth. The dazzling divine light covered a radius of tens of thousands of miles and destroyed many mountains and forests in the surroundings. Nangong Buhua successfully blocked the hundreds of divine light pillars with his strength of 9th heaven divine king and 4 upper king level divine weapons. Not only was he unharmed, but he also protected dozens of guards. The elders were also powerful as they were all upper divine kings. They successfully defended themselves against the attacks of the divine warships and were not injured. Moreover, they had extra strength to protect dozens of guards. But the 4 commanders of the guards could not even protect themselves. They were all injured by the divine warships. More than 30 of the guards who could not escape in time were severely injured. Their bodies were badly mutilated. More than 20 guards were unlucky. They were killed on the spot. Not even their bones were left. Dark red blood streaked across the sky and splashed onto the formation plate. The air was filled with the smell of blood. The divine kings and surgods under Jin Shuang's command were even more motivated. They roared and started the second round of attack. Nangong Buhua and a few elders gritted their teeth in anger. Killing intent surged from their bodies. But they were not blinded by hatred and anger. They did not rush out of the formation plate to counterattack. They continued to cast spells to cover the retreat of the remaining guards. From the looks of it, it would take at most 2 breaths for the remaining dozens of guards to return to Yanshu's cave. By then Nangong Buhua and the rest would return to the Yanshu cave. As long as they closed the heavenly passage's entrance, they would be able to hold on for a very long time, leaving Jin Shuang and the others helpless. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang didn't care about her status anymore. She waved her sword with all her might. Nangong Buhua, don't even think about escaping. Give me your life. Jin Shuang shouted angrily. His strength at the peak of the 8th level of the Divine King realm burst out completely at this moment. He slashed out 6 sword lights at Nangong Buhua. If it was any other time, Nangong Buhua would not have taken him seriously and could easily defeat him. However, Nangong Buhua not only had to resist the siege of many experts, but he also had to divert his attention to cover the escape of the guards. When Jin Shuang waved her sword and attacked, he no longer had any extra strength to resist. Ping ping ping. With a series of muffled sounds, Nangong Buhua was sent flying by the sword light and smashed into the blazing white light gate. The blue brocade robe he was wearing was torn into rags by the sword light, making him look very miserable. Cough cough. Nangong Buhua was also injured. He coughed violently and blood flowed out of his nose and mouth. Now that he was injured, there was a gap in the defensive light shield. The first round of attacks from the 42 God Kings struck more than 30 guards, blasting them to smithereens. Fortunately, the remaining guards had escaped back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. Now only Nangong Buhua, a few elders and 4 commanders of the guards were left on the formation board. Nangong Buhua was so angry that his face turned black. A smear of blood appeared in his eyes. He glared at Jin Shuang and the others and roared, "Jin Shuang, just you wait. Very soon I will make you pay with your blood." After saying this, he led the elders and the commanders of the guards to escape toward the blazing white light gate without hesitation. Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors were filled with anxiety. They immediately shouted and joined hands to cast spells to attack the white light gate. They wanted to destroy the divine formation at the grotto heaven's entrance and stop Nangong Buhua and the others from escaping. They watched as divine spell shadows fell from the sky like a torrential flood. If Nangong Buhua and the others dodged, the blazing white light gate would be destroyed. However, if they did not dodge, the consequences would be obvious. At the moment of life and death, Nangong Buhua decisively gave the order and roared, "You all go first. I will cover you." As he roared, he used all his strength to activate 4 king-level upper divine artifacts to block above his head. He wanted to use his own strength to block the attacks of the many experts and cover the escape of the elders and the commanders of the guards. This scene caused the Nangong clan's elders and guard commanders to be incomparably moved. Their eyes even turned red. Even the divine kings and some divine monarchs under Jin Shuang admired Nangong Buhua. All this time their superiors, such as the inspectors and the deputy commander Jin Shuang, had been bossing them around and looking down on them. How could they count on these high and mighty nobles to protect them at the moment of life and death? They did not even dare to dream about it. At this moment they even envied the people of the Nangong clan. With such a powerful and loyal patriarch, the Nangong clan must be very united, right? Bang bang bang. Boom boom boom. In the next moment the overwhelming radiance of divine skills sent Nangong Buhua's 4 divine artifacts flying and drowned his figure. Amidst the dazzling multicolored light, he was blasted away, rolling and crashing into the distance. Amidst the series of loud noises, his muffled groans could be heard. There was a trail of blood at the edge of the disc. It was the blood that Nangong Buhua had just spat out. Although he was very powerful, second only to a peak divine king. However, no matter how powerful he was, he could not withstand the combined attacks of the 7 inspectors and Jin Shuang. He could not withstand the combined attacks of dozens of divine king experts. After being hit by the overwhelming radiance of divine skills, his injuries worsened and his strength decreased greatly. Fortunately, his sacrifice was worthwhile. The elders and the 4 commanders of the guards took the opportunity to pass through the blazing white light gate and escape back to Yenshu's grotto heaven. Now only Nangong Buhua was still outside the grotto heaven. Jin Shuang and the 7 inspectors smiled maliciously and shouted loudly as they charged towards Nangong Buhua for the 3rd round of attacks. "Let's go together and capture Nangong Buhua. He is alone and has no helpers. Quickly capture him. As long as we capture Nangong Buhua, the Nangong clan will have to surrender. Everyone, let's go together. We can't let him escape no matter what." With so many people attacking Nangong Buhua and him being severely injured, wouldn't it be easy to capture him? Everyone thought that Nangong Buhua would not be able to escape. Unexpectedly, just as everyone was approaching him, he suddenly took out an ancient linen banner and chanted a strange incantation. Zhoosh! The ancient linen banner released a large cloud of gray fog and swallowed Nangong Buhua's figure. Chapter 4062. In less than an instant, Nangong Buhua had disappeared right in front of everyone's eyes. Not only did he disappear but so did the linen banner. The only things left in the sky were Nangong Buhua's 2 divine weapons. There were originally 4 divine weapons, but before he escaped he took back 2 of them. Jin Shuang, the 7 patrols and many deity kings were stunned. Everyone stared at the empty sky and furrowed their brows. Their expressions were extremely ugly. Damn it. It seems like he was prepared to use that divine weapon to escape. Damn bastard, even if he escapes back to Yenshu's grotto heaven he can't escape death. The few patrols were filled with shame and anger as they gritted their teeth and cursed. Jin Shuang felt the same but he could still maintain his calm and control. After a few moments of silence, he led everyone back to the entrance of the grotto heaven. This time he did not waste any time. He pointed at the formation at the entrance and ordered, "I'll give you half a day to crack it or break through it." When Nangong Buhua took out the linen banner, the entrance to Yenshu's grotto heaven was closed. That linen banner of his definitely had a special effect, which was why it was able to help him escape. Jin Shuang and the 900 deity kings and Sir Gods did not have the ability to travel through space and enter Yenshu's grotto heaven. Even Ji Tianxing did not have this ability. Therefore Jin Shuang and the rest could only crack the formation of Yenshu's grotto heaven or break through the formation to enter. Following his order, the 7 patrols and 42 deity kings immediately got busy. They carefully observed the formation at the entrance of the grotto heaven, thinking and deducing a way to crack it. The 900 Sir Gods were on standby. Jin Shuang frowned as he stared at the sky, thinking about his next move. In fact, he also knew that he was sent by the Imperial Preceptor to spy on the military situation. In fact, he and the other 900 people in the field might even become cannon fodder. However, he could not disobey the order, he could only follow it. Nangong Buhua's reaction seemed normal to him. If the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai did not have accurate information to prove that Kenshin was hiding in Yenshu's cave, he might have believed Nangong Buhua. As early as a few months ago, Kenshin had already escaped back to the realm of the gods, but he hid in the cave of Yenshu and did not show himself. Just as the God Emperor had sent back, Kenshin was heavily injured and was currently in seclusion to heal himself. If not, Nangong Buhua would not have tried his best to escape back to the cave of Yenshu to stall for time. This is my only chance to kill Kenshin. I have to rush into Yenshu's grotto heaven before he recovers and take him down. Thinking of this, Jin Shuang turned her head and glanced at the 900 Sir Gods. Her eyes flashed with worry. However, the Nangong clan is an ancient clan after all. They have a very deep foundation. If Nangong Buhua was determined to protect Kenshin, the 40 god kings and 900 godlords might not be able to defeat the Nangong clan. There is a high possibility that both sides will suffer great losses and we will all die in the cave of Yenshu. No, I have to think of a way to prevent an all-out war with the Nangong clan. It would be best if the Nangong clan could stand aside and watch us kill Kenshin. At this moment Jin Shuang was deeply anxious and uneasy. She hated the fact that she had brought too few people with her. Even if she were to send a message to gather more domain masters and god kings, it would be too late. At the same time, in the depths of the cave of Yenshu, in the sky above the palaces, swoosh, a cloud of gray fog exploded in the sky and a blue figure appeared out of nowhere. The figure's clothes were ragged and his hair was disheveled. His entire body was covered in blood and he looked rather pathetic. He was the heavily injured Nangong Buhua. Not far away in the sky and the palaces below, a few groups of guards noticed him and greeted him in surprise. "Master, how did you get injured? Patriarch, are your injuries serious? Quickly send the master back to the secret room to heal." As they shouted, the guards wanted to support Nangong Buhua and send him back to his residence on the main peak. However, Nangong Buhua waved his hand and did not allow them to support him. He said with a hoarse voice, "My injuries are not serious. Don't be so flustered. Quickly inform Lady and a few elders to come to the Great Light Hall for a meeting." 2 groups of guards acknowledged the order and turned to carry out their mission. The other group of guards guarded Nangong Buhua and followed him to the main peak and entered the Great Light Hall. After sitting down on the main seat in the hall, Nangong Buhua took out 2 divine elixirs and consumed them to suppress his injuries. Then he took out a new set of robes and jade crown. After shooting out a few rays of divine light, he changed into a new set of clothes. Although his face was a little pale and his mind was a little weak, at least he didn't look as miserable as before. Not long after, Nangong Nihuang walked into the hall quickly. Sensing that Nangong Buhua's aura was different, she asked worriedly, "Father, are you injured? How is your injury? Is it serious?" Nangong Buhua shook his head and comforted her. After waiting for a while, the elders arrived at the Great Light Hall. As soon as they met, Nangong Buhua asked, "Where are the guards? Are they okay?" The gray-haired great elder quickly reported, "Don't worry, master. The 120 guards who survived have safely returned to Yanxu's cave. The 4 commanders and 120 guards have all suffered either light or heavy injuries. They have already returned to their respective residences and are circulating their martial arts to treat their injuries." Nangong Buhua was relieved and said in a serious tone, "Although I was prepared, I did not expect the Azura God Emperor's lackeys to come so quickly. Although we have all retreated and closed the entrance of the cave. With Jin Shuang and the others' strength and methods, they will be able to break the formation and enter Yanxu's cave within a day. At that time, we will only be able to fight them to a draw even if we use all our strength. I am afraid that after the battle more than half of our people will be dead or injured." At this point, Nangong Buhua sighed heavily. The elders' hearts were heavy and they frowned anxiously. A few elders hurriedly suggested, "Master, it has been 2.5 months. Kenshin should be coming out soon, right? The situation is urgent. I am afraid that only Kenshin can resolve it and not let thousands of our people die." "Master, why don't we knock on Kenshin's door now?" Before Nangong Buhua could say anything, Nangong Nihuang rejected the suggestion. "No. Kenshin is still in seclusion. The 3-month time limit is almost up. He must be at a critical juncture. How can he be disturbed? If he is unable to recover or his strength is affected, won't we be sinners?" The elders frowned and wanted to refute. Nangong Nihuang continued, "What's more, the Nangong clan has decided to follow Kenshin and help him with all our strength. It is not just words. We must show real action. Today Jin Shuang came. We have not started the battle yet and we want to awaken Kenshin to deal with him. If we meet Qi Yan, Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor in the future, won't Kenshin have to deal with them? What else do we have to do?" Chapter 4063. Nangong Nihuang's words stunned the elders. Although her words were simple and straightforward, there was no reason behind it. However, it was this simple logic that was enlightening to the apathetic, causing the elders to feel ashamed. The atmosphere in the hall was a little awkward. The elders looked at each other and did not know what to say. Finally, Nangong Buhua made up his mind and spoke. "Nihuang is right. Since we, the Nangong clan, are trusted and valued by Kenshin, we must not let him down. When encountering difficulties and dangers, we should first think of how to solve them. We should not let Kenshin solve everything while we hide behind to ensure our safety. I believe that Kenshin has the ability to solve it. But if that is the case, what is the meaning of our existence? What qualifications do we have to be trusted and entrusted with important tasks by Kenshin?" These sincere and earnest words made the elders nod their heads in agreement. They no longer mentioned the matter of awakening the sword god. Nangong Buhua ordered again, "Immediately gather all the guards, young disciples and deacons of our clan. Enter a state of battle and protect Yanxu Grotto Heaven. If we protect Yanxu Grotto Heaven, we will be able to buy more time for Kenshin. Even if there is more blood and sacrifice, we will not back down." Nangong Nihuang and the elders acknowledged the order and quickly left the Great Light Hall to carry out their mission. Soon they passed down Nangong Buhua's order. A loud and urgent horn sounded in Yanxu Grotto Heaven. Clan members gathered from all directions and those who were cultivating were also awakened. In just an hour, tens of thousands of Nangong clan members were fully armed and gathered at the square of each mountain peak. Nangong Buhua sat in the Great Light Hall and commanded the 7 elders and dozens of deacons to give out a series of orders. The tens of thousands of Nangong clan members were divided into dozens of teams. Under the leadership of the elders and deacons, they rushed to different places in Yanxu Grotto Heaven to carry out different tasks. The first task was to activate the formation of Yanxu Grotto Heaven and inject divine power into each formation base to strengthen the defense. Only by doing so could the defensive power of the formation be strengthened and delay for a longer time. Just this mission alone had cost 49 teams and almost 6,000 Nangong tribesmen. Next, a few elders and a dozen deacons had to lead more than 3,000 clansmen to set up a few defensive formations with a circumference of 10,000 miles. This mission was personally presided over by Nangong Nihuang, with the full cooperation of several elders. The defensive formation was to cover the mountains and protect the Nangong clan's residents. Once the defensive formation of Yanchu's cave was breached, Jin Shuang and close to 1,000 experts would charge in. At least there would be a second barrier to protect the Nangong clan. When the entire Nangong clan was mobilized and did their best to support and set up all kinds of great formations, the Nangong clan's grand formation had already been set up. At the entrance of Yanchu's cave, the 7 inspectors, 42 divine kings and 900 Sir Gods under Jin Shuang's command were also in a state of bustle. Many divine kings joined forces and understood the mystery of Yanchu's heavenly cave's defensive formation. They began to research on how to break it. Although there was only one formation in Yanchu's fairyland, there were many people who studied the formation. Everyone had their own thoughts and opinions, and their attainments in the Tao of formations were also different. Hence, with the 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings added together, there were more than 30 different suggestions and ideas. Every suggestion sounded reasonable, and there seemed to be a need to put it into practice. However, time did not allow them to do so. Everyone had to quickly come up with an effective plan. A few inspectors and many domain lords argued incessantly. The weaker god kings were basically unable to get a word in edgewise. As such, there were more than 10 suggestions and ideas that were eliminated. However, there were still more than 20 suggestions that needed to be filtered. When Jin Shuang saw this, she frowned and her face darkened. She showed an unhappy expression. When the 7 inspectors saw this, they knew that the deputy commander was unhappy. They did not waste any more time talking to the domain masters and divine kings, and directly eliminated their suggestions. Those domain masters and stronger divine kings were naturally full of grievances, but there was nothing they could do. Who asked the inspectors to have a higher status than them? Even so, the 7 inspectors held different opinions and still needed to be filtered. The 42 god kings had all stepped aside, leaving only the 7 patrol envoys who were still arguing endlessly. Jin Shuang immediately became angry and scolded the 7 inspectors to their faces. The 7 of them immediately became obedient and agreed with a certain inspector's suggestion. In fact, everyone knew that the inspector's suggestion was the best plan. However, everyone had the intention to compete and show off. They were not willing to be outdone. Since Jin Shuang was angry, they did not dare to continue arguing. If they angered Jin Shuang, then the losses would outweigh the gains. Moreover, if they used the inspector's suggestion, even if there was a problem, they could not be blamed. Just like this, the 7 inspectors decided on the plan to break the array. They led the 42 divine kings and began to use their techniques. As time passed, everyone threw themselves into the work of breaking the array. They were especially serious and worked hard. Only the 3 divine warships were idle and were sent away by Jin Shuang. They flew around the entrance of the grotto heaven, inspecting the situation within 100,000 li to prevent other powers from coming to reinforce the Nangong clan. Unknowingly, half a day passed. Although many divine kings and divine monarchs were busy in full swing and looked very serious. In fact, the task of breaking the array had just started not long ago. They were not even halfway done. After Jin Shuang observed carefully, he was so angry that he scolded the divine kings again. He was very clear that the more time they wasted, the more danger they would be in. However, the abilities of the 7 inspectors were limited. No matter how much he scolded them, it was useless. Helplessly, he could only join the ranks of breaking the array and personally cast a spell to break the array. In fact, Jin Shuang's worries were not without reason. Nangong Buhua also thought of sending a message to other powers to ask them to reinforce the Yanshu Grotto heaven. However, after much consideration, he gave up on this plan. The Nangong clan did not have many allies. There were only 2 or 3 ancient clans and 2 sections. Not to mention the 2 sects, they did not have enough experts and masters. Even if they came, they would only be sending themselves to their deaths. As for the 2 or 3 ancient clans, among the 5 masked experts, 2 of them were the clan leaders of the ancient clans. Even if Nangong Buhua used his toes to think, he knew that they would definitely watch from the sidelines. They would take this opportunity to observe the Nangong clan's reaction and test the Kenshin's depth and details. After getting an answer, it would be easier for them to negotiate with the Kenshin in the future. They could not wait for such an opportunity. Why would they send reinforcements? Chapter 4064. No one could help the Nangong clan get through this crisis. In the end, they had to rely on themselves. Nangong Buhua gave up on asking for help. He simply treated his injuries and devoted himself to setting up the array. At the same time, he was also paying attention to Ji Tianxing's movements and the situation at the door of the secret chamber. Time passed by in torment. Very quickly, another half a day passed. Nangong Nihuang led many elders and Nangong clan members to build a defensive array with a radius of 10,000 miles. Although this was only an upper-grade king-level divine array, it could withstand the siege of Jin Shuang and the army for a short period of time. Immediately after, thousands of Nangong clan members cast spells to support the defensive array and its power reached its peak. This made it increasingly difficult for Jin Shuang and thousands of experts to break the array. Jin Shuang's 1 day's time limit had passed, but only 1/3 of the array had been broken. Moreover, as time passed, the difficulty of breaking the array would increase. Because while Jin Shuang's side was desperately trying to break the array, Nangong Nihuang and thousands of Nangong clan members were also desperately trying to repair the array. After a day, the sense of crisis and urgency brought by Jin Shuang and the army had lessened. This caused the morale of Jin Shuang's side to plummet, and the Nangong clan members also heaved a sigh of relief. Since the matter could not be solved in 1 day, then they would use 2 or 3 days to slowly solve it. Jin Shuang also contacted the domain masters of the surrounding domains, asking them to constantly monitor the movements of the surrounding forces. Those domain masters sent messages one after another, reporting the results of their investigations. The results showed that the ancient clans and top forces of the surrounding domains did not have any unusual movements, and were in a state of observation. This made Jin Shuang secretly relieved, and she was even less anxious. At the same time, Ji Tianxing had already cultivated in the distorted spacetime for 10 years and a few months. Within these 10 years, he had already refined 400 pieces of divine persona fragments, and obtained immeasurable benefits. Firstly, his strength had increased. Now that he had reached the peak of the Divine King realm, he was stabilizing his realm after breaking through. Secondly, he had taken more than 100 divine Tao laws from the divine persona fragments and turned them into his own. Now the number of divine Tao laws that he had mastered had successfully reached 1,200. In this world, there had never been a divine king who could grasp so many divine Tao laws like him. Without a doubt, his true combat strength had long since surpassed the God King realm and was infinitely close to the God Emperor realm. However, what surprised him was that, even if he returned to the realm of peak Divine King, he was also unable to sense the power of heavenly Tao, let alone condense a trace of Tao runes. Back when he was still Kenshin, he had already grasped a sliver of the heavenly law's power and had even formed the Taoist rhyme. Now that he had returned to his peak with his previous cultivation experience, he should be able to smoothly grasp the power of the heavenly Tao. But the truth, how could it be like this? Ji Tianxing was puzzled. When he recalled that he had been neglected by the heavenly Tao and had never received any merit rewards, he felt a little depressed. Even though he was still in a state of cultivation, he was still thinking that he had to find out the reason in the future. The battle between the Nangong clan and the Jin Shuang army continued. Another day passed. Jin Shuang and the others had already completed half of their task of breaking the formation. It was obvious that the Nangong clan's efficiency of repairing the formation could not keep up. After all, repairing was not as simple as destroying. Moreover, the overall strength of the Nangong clan was not as good as the 900 Surgots led by Jin Shuang. Everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before the defense formation of the Yanxu Grotto was broken. Nangong Nihuang, a few elders and dozens of deacons had finished their tasks and were conserving their energy, waiting for the arrival of the final battle. Nangong Buhua was also recuperating, trying his best to recover his strength. Everyone understood that in about 1 or 2 days, the bitter battle would arrive. Could the Nangong clan resolve this crisis, and be valued by Kenshin in the future and become the #1 hero? It all depended on the performance of the Nangong clan in this battle. Therefore, the atmosphere in the Yanshu Grotto became solemn, and the Nangong clan became unprecedentedly united. Just like that, 2 tense and depressing days passed. On the morning of the 5th day, there was a burst of cheers at the entrance of the Yanshu Grotto. Following a series of ping 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 sounds, the defense formation of the Yanshu Grotto was finally broken by Jin Shuang and the others. Thousands of divine lights lit up in the sky. Those were the veins of the defense formation, and they were collapsing one by one. The white light door at the entrance also appeared, but it was broken into pieces, turning into divine light fragments and scattered between heaven and earth. An ugly, dark hole appeared. That was the opening of the defense formation, like a huge passageway, connecting the realm of gods and the Yanshu Grotto. The 7 inspectors and the many godly kings and godly lords cheered excitedly as they quickly retreated. Jin Shuang, however, was not happy. Her face was still gloomy, and there was a tinge of worry in her eyes. This was because the original plan to break the defense formation of the Yanshu Grotto in 1 day took a total of 4 days to complete. In addition, the Nangong clan's reaction was too calm, as if they had a card up their sleeve and were not worried at all. Most importantly, these deity kings and sir gods had been casting spells to break the defense formation for 4 days, and their strength had decreased tremendously. When everyone rushed into the Yanshu Grotto and fought with the Nangong clan, they would definitely be affected. However, things had already come to this point, and there was no use worrying and anxiety. They could only take 1 step at a time. After everyone had retreated, the 3 divine warships flew back and arranged themselves into a formation in the sky. Hundreds of cannons extended out and began to accumulate a vast amount of divine power and lit up with a blinding divine light. Boom, 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 boom. In the next moment, hundreds of divine power light pillars burst out at the same time, and with the power to destroy everything, they violently blasted towards the opening. Divine light exploded in the field, and the light fragments scattered everywhere. The opening, which was originally 10 feet wide, suddenly expanded by more than 10 times, and became 100 feet wide. The veins of the formation around the opening were also severely damaged, and they all broke and collapsed. With such a huge opening in the defense formation, no matter how hard the Nangong clan tried to repair it, it would not be able to recover in a short period of time. At the same time, the 3 divine warships' simultaneous bombardment could prevent the Nangong clan from setting up an ambush on the other side of the opening. When the divine light in the sky dispersed, and the earth-shattering sound disappeared, Jin Shuang then gave the order to attack. Charge and kill. As her voice fell, the 7 patrol led the deity kings and rushed into the opening and rushed into the Yanshu Grotto. After everyone had entered the Yanshu Grotto, Jin Shuang then followed in. Only 3 divine warships remained outside to guard the opening, and to assist Jin Shuang and the rest at any time. As for Jin Shuang, the deity kings and sir gods, they rushed into the Yanshu Grotto with murderous intent, but when they looked around they realized that the surroundings were empty. They originally thought that the Nangong clan would send a large number of troops to ambush them and attack them head-on. Now it seemed that the Nangong clan did not intend to take the initiative to attack, and were determined to defend with all their might. Chapter 4065. Since the Nangong clan was not going to fight them head-on, Jin Shuang was naturally relieved. He led the 900 divine monarch and divine king experts as they rushed into the depths of the grotto heaven. Of course, he did not let his guard down. He was always on guard against the Nangong clan's schemes. Along the way, the 7 inspectors spread out to monitor the surrounding situation in case the Nangong clan launched a surprise attack. And reality proved that after flying for hundreds of thousands of miles and arriving at the Nangong clan's palaces, they did not encounter any surprise attacks or trouble. Looking from afar between the mountain peaks, they could faintly see the silhouettes of palaces and residences. Jin Shuang waved his hand, indicating for everyone to slow down and spread out, slowly approaching the area. We advanced all the way and did not encounter any resistance from the Nangong clan. It seems that they have gathered here and are planning to hold their ground and resist stubbornly. Everyone be careful. They did not set up any traps elsewhere, so they will definitely do something here. Jin Shuang held his divine sword and slowly flew towards the palaces. He transmitted his voice to remind everyone to be careful. The 7 inspectors and divine kings said they understood and obeyed, but they did not take it seriously. They did not encounter any resistance and thought that the Nangong clan was terrified and did not dare to fight them. As a matter of fact, some of the inspectors and god kings even imagined that the Nangong clan might hand over the sword god to protect themselves once they revealed their identities. If that was the case, they would have done a great service without any effort. But the reality was different from what they imagined. When Jin Shuang and the others approached the palaces, they were still 10,000 miles away. Between the mountains and rivers around the palace complex, divine light suddenly soared into the sky, forming a huge 5-colored light screen. Shua. In the blink of an eye, a 5-colored light screen with a radius of 10,000 miles appeared, enveloping nearly 100 mountains. The 5-colored light screen was like a canopy in the sky. As the array revolved, it flashed with a dazzling light and released a vigorous divine power fluctuation. Thus, the 10,000 miles of space within the light screen was tightly protected. Immediately after, thousands of Nangong clan members flew out from the various mountains, palaces and residences, lining up in the sky. They formed a formation in the sky and divided into hundreds of teams. They joined forces to cast spells to support the operation of the formation and increase its power. At the same time, their bodies were filled with terrifying killing intent as they glared at Jin Shuang and the others. The expressions of the 7 inspectors and the god kings changed when they saw this. They frowned heavily. This, another great array? Oh my god. We won't have to spend a few more days to break this formation, right? Damn it. Why were the people of the Nangong clan so cowardly? Can't we have a good fight? You cowards, do you only know how to hide in the formation and drag out an ignoble existence? Thinking back to the experience of breaking the array a few days ago, the 7 inspectors and the god kings all had headaches. They cursed angrily, wishing they could kill all of the Nangong clan members. Originally, they had used 4 days to break the formation, so they were already exhausted. It was not easy for them to enter Yenshu's cave heaven and fight with the Nangong clan. They did not expect to have to break the formation again. Many of them had a mental breakdown. However, the Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier could not hear their shouts, so they did not react. However, Jin Shuang frowned and shouted at the Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier, "Nangong Buhua. Are you really going to be a coward? If you are still a person, show yourself. I want to have a good talk with you." There was no doubt about the outcome. The Nangong clan members in the 5-colored light barrier did not react, and Nangong Buhua did not show himself. Jin Shuang thought that Nangong Buhua was purposely avoiding him, but in fact Nangong Buhua was healing himself. Nangong Nihuang, a few elders and many deacons were busy deploying troops to increase the power of the defensive formation. Therefore Jin Shuang shouted outside the formation for a while, but no one responded to him. Jin Shuang, who was ignored, could be said to have lost all face. She was ashamed and resentful. In his anger he said ruthlessly, "Nangong Buhua, I gave you one last chance to live, but you avoided me. You want to play dead with me? Fine, I will fulfill your wish. Within a day I will break through this turtle shell and kill you, you old turtle." Following his order, the 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings immediately spread out and observed the structure of the defensive formation. The 900 divine monarch experts also spread out and consciously formed a formation. Although everyone was unwilling to continue breaking the formation, they felt a headache just thinking about it. However, the deputy commander had suffered such humiliation, so they naturally had to listen to the order and break the formation as soon as possible to kill Nangong Buhua to vent their anger for the deputy commander. However, what they did not expect was that Jin Shuang waved his hand again and asked in a low voice, "What are you doing?" "I am not talking about breaking the formation, I am talking about breaking it. Directly breaking it. Do you understand?" The 7 inspectors and 42 divine kings were stunned for a moment before reacting. Seeing Jin Shuang's anxious and murderous appearance, everyone felt guilty and fearful and subconsciously shrunk their necks. Then, everyone clenched their blades and changed into a new formation, waiting for Jin Shuang's order. Seeing everyone in a charging formation, Jin Shuang's expression eased a little. He waved his sword and ordered, "Everyone listen to my order, break this formation at all costs." In one day I will kill my way into the Nangong clan's light palace. Roar. Roar roar. Kill. Kill kill kill. Charge. The 7 inspectors, 42 divine kings and 900 divine monarchs were all fired up. They let out deafening roars and attacked with all their might. Even Jin Shuang waved his divine sword and roared as he attacked. Everyone unleashed their strongest divine power and unleashed their most terrifying divine techniques. They unleashed a barrage of sword lights, wind, fire, and lightning that blotted out the sky. Bang! Bang bang bang! Boom boom boom! In the next moment, thousands of divine techniques landed on the 5-colored light barrier, exploding with deafening sounds. Divine light fragments that covered the sky flew everywhere. The raging shockwave carried countless fragments of divine light as it spread out in all directions, destroying a few nearby mountain ranges. The light barrier that was thousands of miles wide also trembled, exploding with divine light. Seeing that the first round of attacks from Jin Shuang and the others were close to the limit of the formation's defense, the light barrier was about to crack. The thousands of Nangong clan members revealed shocked and worried expressions. Many of the Nangong clan members who had lower mental fortitude let out cries of surprise. Luckily, there were 3 elders and 20 deacons present. They quickly comforted everyone. Under their command, the thousands of Nangong clan members activated their divine power and poured it into the defensive formation. Thus, the defensive formation quickly dissolved the shockwaves and became as stable as a rock. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.